Assembly now resumes debate on P66. The principles have been proposed and seconded. Does any member wish to speak on the principles? Don't be shy. Deputy Southern.
Good afternoon, Chamber. Didn't expect to be first up, but I rise to my feet to give near unadulterated praise to this proposition. In that, I find its aims and the way it tries to achieve those aims perfectly laudable. They are, in my mind, strictly common sense. And are laid out in a perfectly acceptable manner, so that Section 4, Codes of Practice, draws up those practices and then reinforces them with Section 5, where it's talking about the licensing of landlords, which provides some teeth, or potential teeth, because this is broadly an outline of what powers are being given appropriately to the Minister. It then covers the enforcement aspects, and again I've read through that Section 6 in Part 3 on enforcement and find it substantial enough to be effective, because the point of bringing legislation is always how effective can you make it. It's no point in bringing vague or non-specific terms to the House and saying this will sort things, when in fact what happens is that it doesn't sort anything, but we've done our best, or we've done our duty and done something rather than nothing, often drives Jersey law. The one exception I would say is that in Article 4, under the Codes of Practice, the decision has been made yet again, and it's not particularly only relevant to this legislation, but to all legislation that comes before us, is that in 1A, it's down to an order submitted, but not submitted to this body. Could be regulation. It might be ministerial directive, an MD, a decision, an MD, with an order attached that comes to that table, but doesn't get automatically voted on by this House. And I would always prefer issues brought to the House by regulation, so that we can see them, amend them, and see if they're fit for purpose, rather than a ministerial decision, which often will go by the board, and you only find out later it doesn't work, and you have to come back and try and fix it. So apart from the absence of regulation, or the absence of regulations in making orders, I think it's a thoroughly sound and worthy piece of legislation, which meets, I believe, an identified need in terms of the living conditions of our residents. And this Minister and this House should be proud of this particular piece of legislation.
Any other members to speak? Comments, St. John.
Thank you, sir. Before the debate began, members were asked who had interests, and the landlords duly stood up. But for every landlord, there is a tenant. And without a landlord, you won't have a tenant, or a tenant won't have accommodation without a landlord. And so, sir, in the interests of fairness, I would ask your indulgence that could members who are tenants stand up? And be noted by the Greff. Sorry.
I'm just thinking about that. It's an interesting.
Can it be noted I'm not a tenant of the Constable of St John's, please?
Well, that helps the debate enormously. Connotab, it's clear with landlords that they have a financial interest in the arrangements which are now under consideration by the states. And it's a financial interest which is shared with a large number of people who are landlords, but it's still nonetheless a financial interest. Where I'm having an internal debate with myself is whether or not tenants have got a financial interest in the same way. If they haven't, do they have a general interest? A general interest in the sense of having better quality standard of accommodation, yes, maybe. This is all in order that, for the purposes of the standing order, members will identify whether there is some particular interest which they ought to hold against a speaker when he or she is speaking, and bear in mind when it comes to a vote. That's the purpose of the standing order, so that there's a transparency about it. Frankly, I don't think it's terribly material whether we note the people who are tenants and the people who are owner-occupiers and the people who are landlords, although we have noted the landlords, because they might have a financial interest. So I don't propose to take that any further.
Thank you, sir. Going on from that, I would like to congratulate the Minister for bringing forward the first part. And as he says in his report, the required powers fall into two broad categories. Powers to introduce minimum health and safety standards with respect to rented dwellings. I am surprised and saddened that this has not been done before. And I'm also surprised that there is no minimum standard. However, I do have severe reservations about the second part. Provisions that the states may make regulations to establish a scheme of licensing rented dwellings, and in particular to enable the Minister to issue a charge for licenses. This is another cost to the landlord. And the reason I bring it up is because over the next 18 to 20 years, if we are to believe figures and if the current immigration continues, the private sector is going to have to provide 12,500 additional units of accommodation. And we as an assembly should be encouraging landlords, encouraging investors, and encouraging people to supply that level of housing. Because when there is a shortage, that is when you most likely get poor quality accommodation, because tenants are forced to rent what is available and they don't have the choice. And so a shortage of supply will result in more poorer levels of accommodation. And this assembly should therefore be encouraging more housing to be built. And yet, here we are looking to increase the amount of red tape and the cost to potential landlords. The scheme, as I understand it, is likely to introduce a system where landlords will be forced or encouraged to improve their accommodation. And if there is a star rating, which has been mentioned, this will highlight better accommodation against less good accommodation. But again, there are two sides to the equation. We are all saddened by the fact that there are some, and a very small number, of bad landlords. But there are also a small number of bad tenants. And will therefore be a register created so that landlords may know or be advised about who might be a bad tenant. Also, once you start down the slippery slope of a particular regulation of licensing rented accommodation and allowing inspectors to inspect accommodation, you immediately come into all types of conflict. One of the photographs circulated by the minister shows a cooker which is badly damaged. But the question raised is, who is liable for the cooker and who damaged it? Was it the tenant that damaged it? So why should the landlord pay for another one? Part of provisions is that the storage of food, which loosely translated means you must have a fridge that works. Is that something that is supplied by the landlord? Is that supplied by the tenant? And where do you draw the line? Should the landlord provide a kettle and a toaster, knives and forks and cutlery? This is opening a very dangerous can of worms, in my mind. And if one moves on, as they have in other countries, some form of rating about the heating and the insulation and the quality of the build, we again open up a can of worms which brings the minister himself into direct conflict, on the one hand with environment and on the other hand with planning. Because there are some buildings which are single glazed, but they are also under the planning law protected buildings, and you're not allowed to change to double glazing. So is a landlord going to be penalised on the one hand with his star rating because it hasn't got double glazing, whilst on the other hand the planning department refuses to allow him to change it? So I am very pleased to support the first part of this proposal, but I regret that the second part is something I cannot support. Thank you, sir.
Any other member wish to speak? Senator
Thank you, sir. Sir, higher housing costs and some of the issues that the Constable of St John has addressed in his remarks effectively hurt ordinary Jersey working and non-working people. Thousands of people in Jersey suffer from high costs and high percentages of their income being spent on housing. And this has been a problem that has been accumulating for a number of years, and it is one of these vexed and difficult political problems. The reality is, sir, is that I welcome this legislation, but where I depart from agreeing with the Constable of St John, but I am in agreement with some of it, is that this, and I would want and hope that the Minister would say something in his concluding remarks on the preamble, which I will support, even though I think I hear that it's going to be pulled into scrutiny. I will support enthusiastically, but it also needs to be accompanied by an equally vigorous and clear policy of the Housing Minister and the Planning Minister to acknowledge and to put into place arrangements to ensure that there is a really bold programme of house building of different tenures in accompanying this important proposition. It's been impossible to bring such legislation into Jersey before, which is much needed, because of the fear that so much accommodation would actually be, as the Minister quite rightly says, would be so and of such poor standards that effectively you would create homelessness on a massive scale. It isn't easy to simply pass regulations, because there will be, unfortunately, some accommodation that is simply not even fit, or it's got to have some massive redevelopment or reorganisation for it to be long-term proper accommodation of a decent standard. Even with, sir, a fixed population, before some members get to their feet and start talking about immigration and that other thing about natural rising population because of birth rate and people having babies. The reality is that you need more homes for a given number of population in any event, because for decades the amount of people living in a dwelling has fallen. Today it is probably less than the last census of 2.31 people per house, and it was 3 or 4 decades ago it was 3 point something per house. It is the broken down increasing incidence of divorces, single people being widowed or being alone and who choose to remain in their homes for the rest of their lives, people getting married later. All sorts of different societal impacts have meant that the average number of people living in their homes is falling. And so you actually need more homes for a fixed population. And with a population that is more affluent, certainly as we've seen in the growing economy of jobs and growth, you're seeing people aspire to improving their lot and getting higher quality accommodation. And the solution is simply not only fixing Jersey's broken housing market, to use a phrase that is used in the United Kingdom. We've got to fix the housing market by a number of interventions. This is one of them, without any doubt at all. But there also needs to be, and I know the Minister for Housing shares this view, and probably is probably going to have a few things to say as well. I hope she does. Her predecessor made a significant improvement in the new arrangements for Andium, which have certainly gone to destigmatise a lot of social rented housing, and they're now making investments as a result, although I would have hoped it would have been quicker with the bond that was got for improving the social rented housing stock. There are approximately 7,800, according to the last census, people who are in private rental accommodation. That's actually quite a low percentage compared to some other countries. In other words, there is according to the last census, there is about 42,000 dwellings in Jersey, or households, and there are 7,800 in private rental. And that's not including the non-qualified accommodation, which would be 2,500, another 2,500. Now, that is actually quite a low incidence if you compare the European average of private sector rental. So we actually don't have a big private sector rental market in Jersey. And we need policies in place to ensure that we stimulate that, because it's good that there's a private sector market. There needs to be plentiful accommodation of a good standard in all sectors of the housing market. Private sector rental, social rented, first-time buyers, shared equity, and the open market. And that is the way that we can fix it. I commend the Minister for bringing these regulations forward. They're absolutely the right thing to do. But there is, unfortunately, the reality that there could be an unintended consequence if the appropriate supply side is not equally put in. And yes, members can stand up and say, control immigration, but we have this problem about an ageing society, that actually we need to have a reasonable amount of a growing population to keep the worker-non-worker ratio to a reasonable limit. Otherwise, taxes will go up because health and social services bills have to be paid. It's great that people are living longer, but they cost more. So this I commend. I think it's a very long overdue piece of legislation, but it must be part of a suite of policies that the Housing Minister, together with his good friend, the Planning Minister, together with his good friend, the Housing Minister, now deshackled from her responsibilities of running the estates of the now Andium and can focus on policy issues, can actually work together to provide more supply in all the tenures of accommodation that are needed. And that's not building over greenfield sites. And that's doing a lot of what St Helier says, which is actually making St Helier a great place to live and a place that people can be proud of with good quality accommodation. So yes, this, but it's got to be accompanied by the supply side stuff as well. Thank you, sir.
Any other member wish to speak? Deputy Andrew Lewis.
Thank you, sir. I just want to reiterate something that Senator Joseph has just said. It's very much about supply if we are to resolve our housing problem and the issues here that are being addressed in terms of quality. The two have to go together. My concern with this legislation is that without sufficient supply, landlords are perhaps not as scrupulous as they perhaps ought to be in terms of their quality. It takes a brave tenant to say, I have a problem, when there's nowhere else to go. We really do need to address the supply issue. Now, I know the Housing Minister has plenty of ideas, but I listened with interest to Constable Crowcroft earlier today, expressing concerns in his question about using green space for development. So which is it? We've got green space, some of which can be used effectively for more housing. We have lots of brown space that could be used more effectively for more housing. But there is a supply chain here issue, and that is our first-time buyer homes now are most likely going to be in urban areas where we have some deprivation already. But that next step for young people, people with families in particular, is aspiration to a home with a garden and a garage, which is probably going to be in the countryside. So unless you think cleverly outside the box what you do with your land in Jersey, including spaces that might be deemed today as green, you haven't got a proper supply chain. I can see some members concerned about how dare you suggest that we should build on green spaces. I'm not actually suggesting that. I'm suggesting we're cleverer with the space we've actually got already to address the supply chain. Without supply, you will have unscrupulous landlords, despite all the legislation you put in place, because it will take a brave tenant to say, I've got a serious problem here with my landlord, when they've got nowhere else to go. And that price cycle as well. Without supply, the price goes up. If you improve your property, because this legislation will ensure that you do if there is a complaint levied against you, the rent's going to go up as well, because you've got a better quality unit. Why wouldn't a landlord charge more for a better quality unit? And he can, or she can, if there's not enough supply. So the supply chain is essential. There's another aspect of this that concerns me greatly too, is perhaps there's not enough joined-up thinking across all the segments of the states. And I'm talking here, in isolation, we're talking about environmental health issue. But actually we've got social services here. We've got education department, the health department, the planning department, the housing department, all of whom should be working together to create better housing, better living standards. You can't just do it with legislation in one particular ministerial area. In this case, it's environmental health that's fallen into the remit of the Environment Minister. But wages for those that are currently in substandard accommodation, they're usually in that substandard accommodation because it's perhaps costing less, because they can't afford anymore, because the wages are so low. Minimum wage is too low in Jersey. I'm sorry, it's been said by others today. It is too low to afford the rent you would need to pay in order for landlords to actually have the standard of accommodation that we would all aspire to. So unless you address issues like wages at the same time, this issue will not go away overnight. I was fascinated by the Minister's admission that actually we don't know how many units of accommodation we've got in Jersey that are rented. So there is no proper licensing regime for tenanted accommodation. Yet we have a very small housing stock. So if you're going to do it anywhere in the world, surely a proper licensing regime of all rented units in Jersey should be, with technology available to us today, relatively easy to do. And if you've then got legislation in place to license it, inspect it, and ensure its quality, then you've got more of a perfect circle. But at the moment, you don't have that, because we don't know how many units there are available for renting in Jersey. Which brings on another issue about the population level. Some will say we don't really know how many people there are in Jersey. We're guessing a bit. That guessing, by the way, I think is quite well informed by the stats unit's knowledge of people's working habits and other things. So I don't think it's that far off. But the fact is that we would know more about our population if we had a proper register of all the housing units we have in Jersey. We don't even have a land registry. Now I sit on a panel at the moment where we're reviewing the whole issue of property and the exchange of it in terms of transactions. And that's come out in that review. There's no land registry. If you have no land registry, you then don't know what's sitting on that land in terms of property until it's conveyed. So there are lots of things that are wrong with the system, which the Minister for Environment now is trying to tackle some of these, but they can't all be tackled unless you do the other things too. A land registry, a higher minimum wage, a proper registration of properties. They all need to be done. So I hope this is the start of something really exciting, that we can actually end up with really good quality housing for everybody, and also that aspiration fulfilled to own your own property as well. We have some of the lowest home ownership figures in the country, and lower than a lot of other places too. And that's because, hey-ho, supply. There's not enough supply. So even if you aspire to home ownership, you can't achieve it very easily because where you're living at the moment, the rent's so high because the supply chain. There's not enough supply, so the rents will be high, and sometimes for substandard accommodation. The OECD, in a recent report, said very clearly that it's a fundamental right, good quality housing, fundamental human right. In fact, they go further and say access to good quality, affordable housing is a fundamental need and key to achieving normal social policy objectives, including reducing poverty, enhancing equality of opportunities, social inclusion, and mobility. We're not doing that on all sorts of levels, yet we are one of the most developed, prosperous countries in the world. Yet we haven't sorted it out with our housing. So I welcome this legislation because it is a start to improving that situation. But with that must come other things. We must have a high minimum wage. We must have more supply. We must fulfill for so many people that aspiration of home ownership, make it a real reality. You can only do that if you increase the supply chain. And that's going to be a matter of planning as well, and the island plan, and realistic, unemotional approach to what we do with our land. At the moment it's too emotional. But I tell you what, it's very emotional when you go and visit some of these places, as I've done in my district and a former role I had in the States, where I saw poverty that I never believed existed in Jersey. And it does. And it's because of low wages, because of poor accommodation. And we've got to aspire to better than that. And I think members do. And this is a great step towards that. So I absolutely commend the legislation, but it has to come hand in hand with other things. So I do hope that other ministers, the housing minister, the education minister, the minister here has already said so clearly that young people living in poor accommodation, they don't aspire to the best they can in their own education because they're not got nice homes to go to. I was amazed when I read the shelter report, some of those heart-wrenching stories about young people in poor accommodation who were frightened and didn't want to go home from school because they were going into such poor accommodation. Now I know in my district that happens. And I know that children go to school smelling of damp. because they cannot get the smell out of their clothes, because damp in Jersey in accommodation, one of the biggest issues that both tenants and landlords have to resolve. And this goes some way to resolving that. I don't want children turning up to school and having their colleagues, their fellow pupils saying, I don't want to sit next to you because you smell of damp. And believe me, that happens quite often. And in a modern society like Jersey, that is appalling. And we've got to do something about it so that our young people can achieve at school, aspire to greater things, have better jobs, earn more money, be homeowners, or at least live in good, high-standard accommodation, which will not happen unless all the departments that I've spoken about get together and achieve something great. High-standard accommodation to match our high standard of education, our high-to-be levels of health. We don't want it inundated with people that are in there, in that hospital, because of substandard accommodation, because their health has been compromised because of it. So this is a step on a journey, and I hope that other ministers will be bringing forward legislation not dissimilar, policies not dissimilar, so that we can have some proper joined-up thinking, and we can aspire to some of the best accommodation in the world, not, albeit a small segment of our accommodation, being very poor. But having said that, I think that segment is bigger than what some would realise. The OECD suggests that within their membership, 15% of people are living in substandard accommodation. I wouldn't be surprised if that figure is reflected in Jersey. But you know what? We don't know. There's no registry. So maybe that's the next step. So I would urge members to absolutely support this legislation. It is fundamental, part of the jigsaw puzzle. But don't stop there. There's far more we can do, and we should do it. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Bree.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm sure that all members will agree with me that this legislation is both welcomed and very overdue. Government has a social responsibility to all members of society, and without doubt, housing and the quality of that housing is vital to public health and well-being. But, as ever, the devil lies in the detail. So I have a number of concerns or questions that I'm hoping that the Minister can allay any concerns I may have. For example, the codes of practice and minimum standards that are referred to in the legislation. Where are those listed? And why could they not have been attached or presented at the same time as this piece of legislation? Because a lot of what is referred to in this legislation refers to regulation or ministerial orders. It would have been very helpful for members to see the whole picture rather than just the primary law. I also have slight concerns about the right of access by authorised persons to rented dwellings. Now, there is a section within the draft law that refers to a right of access under warrant. Now, I am sure that some people, like myself, have concerns as to how far the powers of the rights of access extend to. And I note within the report that there is a large section on human rights issues and whether or not this primary law conflicts with the rights of the individual as enshrined within human rights. And I would appreciate it greatly if the Minister could explain his view on whether or not individual tenants or landlords' rights will be conflicting with human rights legislation should this new law go ahead. There is also the question of licence fees. Once again, we are not shown details of what those fees may be. But if we take a conservative number of 12,000 rented dwellings on the island, And some people have said it could be as high as 18,000. And we take an average fee of £100 per annum for each rented dwelling to be issued with a licence. That equates, in my simple maths, to £1.2 million per annum revenue through licence fees. So the question is, where will this money go? And in fact, is it really just an additional tax or charge? Could the licence fee be lower to actually cover the costs of issuing a licence rather than just a blanket fee to gain additional revenue? And if those licence fees are to be fixed at, say, an average of £100 per dwelling, can we not ring fence or hypothecate that income to actually go towards improving standards, improving environmental health, and use it for something that is directly related to the issues that we are trying to attack with this legislation? I know that it is not this particular Council of Ministers' view that any tax should be hypothecated or any charge should be hypothecated, but here is an ideal example of how we could use that to improve the health of all islanders. There is also the issue of listed and historical buildings. Now, many of these are actually rented dwellings. An awful lot of them do not have, how can I put it, well-fitting windows. The classic problem is the wooden sash window. And yet, under current building regulations, you are not allowed, as a landlord, to install double glazing. Therefore, you are going to have a dwelling that a tenant is going to say, I'm getting a lot of, how can I put it, problems with the ingress of water, drafts, possibly damp. So you then have a situation whereby a landlord who owns a historical or listed building is probably going to fail some of the checklists on what makes a 5-star dwelling. The Minister has said many times that he is going to address this issue, generally for historical or listed buildings, and yet we have seen nothing. So is this creating a conflict between one piece of legislation that relates to a rented dwelling and another set of regulations that relates to an historical or listed building? And again, I would seek guidance from the Minister on how he intends to deal with the possible issues that will arise. All of that said, I fully support the principles behind this draft law. For too long, we have heard horror stories about the conditions of some rented dwellings. We do have landlords on this island who are exceptionally good, who look after their tenants, but we have to be able to deal with those who do not. And I think, as I said right at the beginning, this legislation is both welcomed but very, very overdue. Thank you, sir.
Senator Ferguson.
Thank you, sir. Yes, we do need to address the problem of the rogue landlord, but it also feels to me that this is very much a balance between central government control, independence, and all underpinned by a lack of population policy. Now, there are one or two points that I will make now, sir, and I shan't make them again. Article 2, paragraph 4, the number of allowed lodgers has been reduced from 4 to 2. What's the number of houses that this is going to affect, and why has it been changed? There is no explanation of the rationale in the report, and according to the definitions, the number of lodgers defines the dwelling as being subject to regulation or not. So obviously the number of dwellings being regulated because of this will be significantly increased. But will the owners then cut down the number of lodgers and stay unregulated? So with one, sort of stroke of the pen, we're going to make more people homeless or illegal. Appeals have been allowed against notices, but it's to the Royal Court. I'm sorry. Why? This is an expensive procedure. Why is it not to a tribunal? Some of these matters could, I'm led to believe, I stand to be corrected on this, they could fall under the powers of the Rent Control Law, but does this mean the Rent Control Law is going to be repealed? And the elephant in the room is the population policy. Yes, build lots more houses, but please do not let us reconstruct the ghettos of tomorrow in St Helier, which is why all questions of the supply of houses are based on the number of the population wanting somewhere to live. It is all underpinned by the population policy. Yes, we want people to have decent houses. Yes, we don't want people with mould growing down the walls and their children with asthma. I agree with that. But, we need to solve all the ensuing things as well. And I'm not sure that we've got to strike a balance between building on green fields and building ghettos in St Helier. So, let's at least be able to check on the quality of the rented accommodation, but let's bear in mind there are some other very serious, very big problems to solve.
Deputy St John.
Thank you, sir. As others have said, this is an extremely important, I think, historical moment for Jersey in bringing this legislation in, and I fully support the principles. So the issue that I do have, and as being Vice Chair of the Environment, Housing, Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel, and have eloquently asked the Chairman to consider bringing this in after the States have made the decision on the principles, I think it's appropriate for me to speak on my particular concerns. One of them being the actual ability to enforce the legislation. I'm not a big fan of bringing in legislation that we cannot afford to enforce, and this has been an issue in the UK with their health and safety dwellings law, where councils have had money removed from them over the last few years and have not had the people to actually enforce the legislation that they're required to. And we can only see every week reports in national newspapers about the issues of housing in England, not just about the supply, but the actual standards. And there's a great deal of issues that they're trying to tackle with there at the moment. The other concern I have surrounding this is, of course, we've got a lot of legislation in place. So I did a lot of research on all our legislation, our policies, and our information. And I was quite shocked, to be fair, sir. In the report to this legislation, there's mentioned the ministerial decision was the submission for law drafting instructions. I couldn't access it on gov.je, so I don't know what it said. There is a mention of an earlier proposed law, but no access to the particular proposition, which was the earlier proposed law. There was no mention of R87/2015, which was issued by the Housing Minister, about the policy direction of housing for the states, which actually talks about bringing in this legislation. No mention of that in the report whatsoever. And it occurred to me then, well, how many other times have the states looked at this particular issue? How many times have they considered it in the whole, looking at housing in the whole, actually trying to grapple with all the various different issues? And I found a document dated 10 years ago about the housing, I'm going to get it right, sir, incorporation of the Housing, Health and Safety Rating System into the housing law of the States of Jersey. A report by the Safe and Healthy Housing Research Unit, School of Law, done by the University of Warwick in February 2007. So then, of course, I went on to read the information regarding that. It's based on the same system they've got in England, and how they carry out their health and safety laws with regards to rented dwellings. But again, I go back to the background in the report, and I say, well, is that the system that we're going to be adopting? No mention of it. Then I look at the statutory nuisances law, which is mentioned, and the loi sur la santé publique. And are they going to stay? Are they going to be removed? What role do they play with regards to this particular legislation? How does it all fit and piece together? What does it actually mean, not just for the landlord, but for the tenant? And that's the most crucial part for me, sir, is the actual tenant, the customer, the person at the end of all of this that has to live in substandard accommodation because we're not providing the supply that's needed in the island. And that's one of the many issues that we have. And with the money that Andium have got, hopefully, it will relieve some of the issues. But that's only, like I say, one part of a bigger problem. The other concern I have, sir, is, of course, the ability to actually complain or to make a concern known about substandard property. How does that tenant feel, especially if they're a vulnerable person, a vulnerable family, in terms of their safety and security? What do we do as a government to support them and assist them in carrying out that complaint about substandard accommodation? And then how does their future relationship carry on with the landlord once that's happened? What's the safety and what's the mechanism that we've got to support those people in those types of situations? Because it's not easy just to say to that person, move out and move somewhere else, because we don't have the supply to do so. And we're not going to build that many houses within the next year or so. So that's another part of the issue. And I see the housing minister huffing over there. It's good to know, but I think we do need a lot more, and it does come into, which members have mentioned, the issue of population. But I'm not going there. I'm sticking to the housing side of things at the moment. There's too many different bits and pieces all over the place that gives me a particular straight idea, a direction exactly what it is that we're achieving overall. I absolutely 100% support the principles of this, but I think there's a better way that we can do this. I think we can be better than other areas, and I think that we could put our heads together and do something and improve possibly the legislation that we have in front of us. But I'd like to really get into the detail with the scrutiny panel in terms of looking at the wording in the legislation and how it works and what it means, and ensuring that it ties in with all the other pieces of legislation that we have, and actually finding out what legislation it is that we want to either repeal or amend so that it all fits together and makes sense and everyone understands where they stand in terms of the legal side of things. The other note that I'd like to make as well is we've recently had a report released regarding from the Jersey Law Commission about improving administrative redress in Jersey. And we've got a lot of legislation that refers to various different tribunals and different ways of, addressing decisions made by administration in the states of Jersey. And some with teeth, some without teeth. And I have seen it firsthand and had to help members of the public, as I'm sure many others in the States Assembly probably have, in terms of addressing decisions made by departments and trying to ensure that it's done fairly, appropriately, and that there's proper checks and balances. I'm concerned, as Senator Ferguson said, about it going to the Royal Court, purely because of the cost basis. And I looked at other areas, and a lot of other areas that have these typical types of systems to ensure proper standards in housing, habitable, actually being able to live in these in this accommodation, they have tribunals. And so I think that fits into the context, very well into the context of this recent report that's been released by the Jersey Law Commission. I think it was said in the UK only last year when they were trying to amend their legislation about having an habitable added into their legislation, and it was rejected by the House of Commons. But one thing that was said by an MP was, where else in modern day life could someone get away with this? It's a consumer issue. If I purchased a mobile phone or a computer that didn't work, didn't do what it said it would, or was unsafe, I would take it back and get a refund. If I purchased food from a shop and it was unsafe to eat, I would not only get a refund, but there is a high possibility the shopkeeper could be prosecuted. Yet if I rent from a landlord, perhaps the only available property for me, and it was unsafe to live in, then I can either put up or shut up. In a market where demand outstrips supply, renters lack basic consumer power to bargain for better conditions. And that's where the role of government comes in. And that's where we have a role to support these people. And there is a minority. And that minority should be learning off of the majority that are doing a very good job and looking after people. But there needs to be a level playing field right across the board. And I think the other issue that needs to be recognised that we have as well is the £11 million we pay out to private landlords for income support. There was a report done, another report. I've lost count of the amount of reports I've read just to do with this legislation today. So it shows that this is a vast expanding issue that needs to be grappled with in an overarching way and not just looked at as in if we pass this legislation, everything's going to be fine, because it won't. And we have a responsibility as representatives to ensure we provide that safety and security for the members of the public. In the report that I'm going to find the other one, just one moment. There was a report done by Social Security. And I'm not going to find it now, I bet you. Yes, sorry. There was a report done in 2013, Income Support for Rental Costs in the Private Sector, R44 2013, which actually talks about the private rental sector. That was done at the time we were doing the Housing Transformation Programme side of things. And we actually decided, we're going to add another £1 million into income support to support the system and assist people living in private rental, because it was recognised that the social housing side couldn't at the moment take all the people that needed to be housed. And that was recognised. But that report goes on and explains the numbers of people. From the census 2011, there was counted 7,806 dwellings in the qualified private rented sector. In addition, there were 1,274 dwellings provided as service or tied accommodation, and 1,070 lodgers renting accommodation in other people's homes. There were also 2,563 other non-qualified households renting accommodation. There were 1,522 tenants in the private rented sector in receipt of income support at October 2011, or 19.5% of the 7,806 qualified private sector tenants. So that just gives you kind of a flavour. And the 1,522, okay, this was 2011, but that's the figures that I've got in this report. But a lot of these people that are on income support are in a vulnerable situation, are in need of support. And we have a responsibility to ensure that they're safe, they're secure, and that they live in health and safe accommodation. The issue of the regulations coming forward for the States Assembly about having a licensing scheme, this is the other thing that does concern me. I took it upon myself because I actually serve on another scrutiny panel, Education Home Affairs, and we'd been questioning about the fire service and how much they charge for their fire inspections, and the fact that we've actually had their user pays charges changed. Ministerial decision was made back in June to change their charges so that in 2019 or 2020, I think it is, that their charge will go up to £400 per inspection. That's 50% of the cost for providing that service. That's what they've advised. So I went back to them and I asked them for a breakdown. And so then when I look at that and I think to myself, well, fire inspection, and it gives you various different properties of what they inspect, etc. And then I hear from the minister today, well, £50 for licensing, and seeing how much that would cost to actually, how much this would cost to actually properly, what I mean actually properly enforce and properly inspect, I don't know who to believe. So is the fire inspection right? Is what they're doing correct? You know, how far will this law go in terms of inspection? What does that mean? And how does it work with the fire service? Because I see that there's been work between the officers and the fire service and housing and all those different areas, but it doesn't explain to me what that means. So although I'm willing to support the principles, I would say with my chairman, if we were to pull the legislation in, to look at the legislation in detail and to look at all the other issues in terms of how it works, and it meets that proper policy direction in R87 2015, and ensure that there's an overarching enforcement and that there is the manpower and resources to do this job effectively, appropriately, and supports and protects the public, then I think that's the best way to move forward. And I really look forward to listening to other members' views about the principles of this legislation and how important or not important they believe this to be for the public of Jersey. Thank you, sir.
Call Deputy Trinity.
Thank you, sir, and I'm pleased that to follow Deputy Balwa because she is quite right. It's the customer, the tenant, is the most important person in this proposition. And also pleased that so many people have spoken about the importance of housing and especially the importance of supply, which in turn, hopefully, will bring down the prices of the rents. It is supply, 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 as I've been mentioning for a little while. So I'm pleased to support, obviously, the draft Public Health and Safety Rented Dwelling Law to introduce minimum standards for all categories of rented accommodation in Jersey. This proposition is long overdue. This law is one of the key policy initiatives set out in the 2016 Housing Strategy and will strengthen standards and oversight in the rented sector, including the private rental accommodation, social housing, lodging houses, and staff accommodation. This will make it a level playing field. Everyone in Jersey must have access to affordable, good quality and secure housing. But our laws in this area of standards have been lagging behind others. And Deputy Lewis and Andrew Lewis is quite right. We have no landlord registry. Far too long there have been people in the island whose homes lack even the basic protection and facilities. And sir, above all, they've been paying for the privilege of it. Indeed, sir, for those States members who went to the presentations by the Environmental Health team, and I think I congratulate them for the work that they do in the poorest sections of our community, I hope most were horrified of what they find each and every day, including Christmas Eve. Indeed, the Care Inquiry report identified how housing in Jersey has historically been inadequate and resulted in vulnerable children being received into care. So the law, sir, is a significant step in the right direction, setting and enforcing minimum health and safety standards in the rented sector so that people can be assured their home is in good repair, adequate facilities such as water and heating, which I take it we all expect, and will be free from damp and mould. Where this is not the case, the law will provide a robust enforcement mechanism to ensure landlords resolve the problems in properties they rent, providing, of course, that the want of repair is a fault of the landlord. Some members may feel we are going too far in setting these standards and may be worried about the impact this could have on rents. So, to that, I would simply say that these are minimum standards. They are not luxury standards. The law would ensure rented accommodation meets the basic standards we all expect from our homes. So, the rented accommodation must be wind and watertight, free from health and safety hazards, free from electricity faults and fire risks, and include reasonable modern facilities. We know, sir, that the cost of our community of poor standard housing is immense, and members have mentioned the effect on health and education especially. And think about that child's educational attainment or the cost of hospital caring for an elderly person as a result of their tripping down a flight of steps because their home lacked just a handrail. With the support of having this law in place, a few simple modifications could help prevent much greater costs to society in the long term. I'm also pleased to note that the law includes provision for the states to introduce licensing for landlords. Whilst the decision to license landlords should ultimately be the decision for this Assembly by regulation, the ability to license rented accommodation will assist us in better understanding the condition of the properties in the rented sector and help promote good standard and also, sir, professionally managed accommodation. For the majority of good landlords in Jersey, this law will mean no change, but it will enable them to compete fairly in the market. For those it doesn't meet, it will raise the standards, and more importantly, sir, it will help those tenants live in good, decent accommodation. As for the 45% of islanders who rent, whether this is in social housing, private rented accommodation, lodging houses, or staff accommodation, this law will provide assurance and protection that their home is secure, good quality, and meets their basic needs. And sir, I'm pleased to say that Andium and the other social housing providers meet decent home standards. Andium will complete their project well ahead of time. By the time set was 2020. They hope to reach 100% decent accommodation by 2019. This law, too, I think, is especially important in relation to agricultural workers' accommodation. Our ability to inspect and monitor standards in the accommodation has been very limited. And it is time that agricultural workers who contribute so much to our island receive adequate protection. So I urge members to support this draft law. Thank you.
Deputy Lafondre.
Yes, thank you, sir. Apologies, we've got some problems with my microphone. Although now I've learned for the benefit of members, the grey can turn us off if you're too long in mid-flow. Couple of points on the...
Not just the graph, actually.
On the proposition, I'm basically, as Deputy St John has alluded to, I understand that the scrutiny panel do want comments from members on this matter in the event that they do call us in, and I actually hope they do. I endorse the comments by Deputy Bree on the rights of access that does give this right concern. I should say for the avoidance of doubt, I've got absolutely no problem with the principles, as have many members elucidated to already. Alluded to even. analogy that's been put to us, and I believe that was in a briefing at some point, was the increase, and I believe it's to 2035, is something like 230 Les Marais tower blocks, to give you a visual analogy. So that has to be, it's the other side of the equation. That comes right down then to the ability of people to come on the island to actually find the right accommodation. I think from the point of view of people looking at the details, I hadn't appreciated the comment made by Senator Ferguson that the definition of lodge of up to now you can have up to 5 lodges without having to comply with anything. That's going to be reduced to 2. Whilst that seems welcome, I wonder whether there needs to be some form of transition arrangement. In other words, if you've got 5 lodges now, and when the law comes in, presumably there has been a transition arrangement to cover the requirements that you're now suddenly going to be obliged to cover. It does make sense on the other hand, because I suppose it gives greater control about unknown accommodation and where people are living. One thing I think I just want to dwell on slightly greater detail that's been identified by at least 2 members is the financial and manpower implications of this. Now, what this is saying, it says the draft law will be implemented without any increase to the current Department of the Environment financial budgets and without any change to the current Department of the Environment manpower levels. So number 1 is it comes back to the issue about resources. And number 2 is this actually a tax? In fact, is it actually a tax on tenants? Because ultimately, these charges, even though they're minimal, will go to the tenants, because rents will either go up or the landlord will just charge them directly. So is it a tax? I've got no great issue if it does go into some form of assistance or improvement or funding toward greater affordable housing, whatever it is. But if it is not increasing the manpower levels to enforce the law, then why do you need the charge in the first place? I will just note one other issue. Again, I'm trying to speak once, is that there's a specific issue in the law itself around corporate bodies, and basically says that any offence, if it's attributable to any neglect, and then it gives a list of people. And now I've always understood, and obviously I'm an accountant, not a lawyer, sir, that negligence is normally a specified term in law. So if and there's a specific level you have to test, you have to reach if you are negligent in something. But I'm unclear as to what any neglect might be. And to give a slightly tongue-in-cheek example, the Minister for Housing could have been argued to be neglectful or guilty of neglect when she put some stuff in the rubbish bin earlier today and caused a slight accident in my vicinity. So it was an accident, but would that be an offence, if that makes sense? Because it's neglect. What is neglect? Negligence I can understand. And I'm not expecting the Minister to deal with that. If this does get called in, I would appreciate if that could be considered, because it seems a different test, particularly when it is applicable to, if it's an organisation and they've got a manager, I presume that would be a managing agent as well. It's at what level that comes in. I think that probably covers my point. So I've got no problem with the principles. I'm happy to support them, but I think there are some detailed issues that I need to understand. Thank you, sir. And if you could...
Comments on St Helier.
Thank you, sir. I rise really to make what may be a point of order, but I'll be guided by you, sir. In her speech, Senator Ferguson twice referred to the slums of St Helier. I think that's an unfortunate phrase. I think we all agree that poor accommodation can occur anywhere on the island. I'm particularly grateful to the Housing Minister who pointed to agricultural accommodation as being particularly worthy of protection and improvement. So I would ask the Senator if she'd be willing to withdraw those remarks.
If I could actually correct it, I talked about reconstructing the ghettos of tomorrow in St Helier. If I've upset the inhabitants of St Helier, and particularly the Connétable, then yes, I will withdraw it with pleasure, sir. It wasn't meant to be pejorative about the current housing stock in St Helier. It was looking forward to what might occur in St Helier.
I'd apologise to the Senator. She did say the ghettos of St Helier, not the slums. I believe I put words into her mouth. Either term is clearly unfortunate, and I accept her her comments. Thank you, sir.
Deputy St Mary.
Thank you, sir. I thought it might be helpful to members if I explained a little more thoroughly and briefly the present stance of scrutiny in this. We did receive a brief presentation on the proposed law some weeks ago, and to a man and woman, we approved the principles. For my own part, I accept the blame for this. I had thought at that stage that scrutiny of the regulations, when they eventually came out, might be the way forward. But on further reflection, the panel have thought there is more to it than that. We could have requested or advised the Minister, we wanted to call it in earlier, but we did feel that it would be helpful if we actually heard the views of members themselves before we embarked on our process. That is, and today has proved that has been useful. There are a number of aspects we do wish to consider, and I like to think that most of them, or I like to think that those identified by members were already on our radar. I refer to the codes of practice being introduced by order rather than by regulation, and that I think is particularly important given that there's a criminal aspect to it as well. Deputy Bree referred to the problems with listed buildings. Again, we noted that. And more than one member has referred to the appeal process as the Law Commission's report on improving administrative dress in Jersey says they recommend that over 50 rights of appeal that currently lie to the Royal Court should instead be made to the Jersey Administrative Appeals Tribunal as and when it comes in. I suspect that 50 then mentioned has already increased, and if this law goes through as is, it will be increased by one there. I am proceeding on the basis that, and in the hope that this new appeals tribunal will be set up fairly quickly, because clearly the right of appeal only to the Royal Court is, I think, a major stumbling block to many people who would otherwise appeal. But as I say, sir, there are a number of items in the legislation we do wish to scrutinise, and we shall at that stage be calling in when invited to do so. The Deputy Sir John has quite rightly referred to the fact that this is but a piece in the overall jigsaw regarding housing, and other members, Deputy Andrew Lewis and Senator Oz have similarly referred to that. We do accept that, and I think it's safe to say that a greater review of housing is again on our radar after this has been scrutinised. But for the moment, sir, that essentially is it. All members of the panel, I think, approve the principles. There is more work to be done. I apologise to the Minister and his department for get the stage where we are going to call it in later than we perhaps should have done, but I think it is important that we do give it the further attention, particularly as regards many of the items mentioned by members this afternoon. Thank you, sir.
Senator Ritchie.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to follow the Deputy and his comments he's making about the approach that scrutiny intend taking. I'm very pleased that the comments that have been made about how supportive people are about the principles. I think anybody who's had the opportunity to look at the photographs of the way people are currently living day in, day out within our community, and the circumstances which officers are going along and visiting and having to deal with trying to improve matters for people who are living in these circumstances, we should be ashamed of what's happening within our community. It's a real unfortunate set of circumstances. It's disgraceful, actually, but some people are having to live in these circumstances. And I'm afraid some of the speeches I've heard this afternoon about not being prepared to go ahead with debating the articles, that's a great shame, because every day that goes by, children's, families' health are being affected. And I'm finding that very difficult ever since I've become aware of this situation. I have to admit, I'm sorry I haven't become aware of this sooner. I'm really upset with myself that I haven't been totally aware of what's going on in our community. This is disgraceful. And if we're prepared to let this continue even a day longer or 2 days longer to allow to consider this in more depth, I can't cope with that. I would hope that the Committee of Inquiry of Abuse, it's quoted in there about the circumstances that children are living have lived in within our community. It's just not good enough. I'm sorry if I'm going to become quite emotional about it, because I feel really annoyed and upset that we're going to get to a situation today that everybody supports the principles, thinks it's fantastic, but we're going to do a lot more work on it. We're going to dig around. We're going to trying to improve upon what we've got. This is a really good step forward. This is something we can move forward and if we want to change at a later date, well, let's do that. Please, I ask members to support the principles, which I sense that people are very prepared to do that, but every day that goes by and we don't have legislation in place, we are putting children's health at risk, and they're not being educated properly, and it's actually doing our whole community a disservice. I'll leave it there. Please think about scrutiny, what you're going to do, because I'm sorry if you are going to pull it in to delay it even further. I cannot cope with that. Thank you very much.
Sir, point of order, please, on that speech. The citation and commencement, Article 22, where it states that it shall come into force on such day as the states may by act appoint. Does that mean that it'll only come into force when we bring the Appointed Day Act? After it's been through Privy Council. So how long does that take, roughly?
It's a much speedier process than it used to be. Attorney no doubt will help, but I understand it normally comes through within a couple of months.
Yes, between 2 and 4 months.
Senator Green.
Thank you, sir, and I'm pleased to follow Senator Routier. And it comes no surprise to members that I will be speaking, or I am speaking, in support of this draft law, because it will introduce minimum standards for categories of rented accommodation. So the senator that occupied this seat before me when I was sat over there in the deputy seat, Senator Lamuckle, used to have a saying that the downfall of a good plan was the quest for a perfect plan. Well, we've got a very good plan here, sir. And I'll come back to that later. Members will be aware, sir, that my previous portfolio was housing. I understand the need for such regulation. I understand the importance of this law for the health of islanders, and in particular for the health of our children. And I agree with Deputy Lewis, who also talked about the stigma of children in poor accommodation, as well as the health effects on children. To be called smelly at school because they're living in accommodation that causes their clothes to be mouldy, to have nowhere warm and dry and free of mould to study, to be ashamed of where you live and afraid to bring friends home so that they see where you live. So I had a very privileged upbringing as a child. I was brought up, strangely enough, in accommodation that had no electricity, no water, a toilet shed down the road with 7 other cottages. But when I say we were privileged, sir, we were, because we were loved, and my parents worked night and day to keep that house spotless and decorated. It wasn't the norm then. It shouldn't be the norm now, but such accommodation, I'm afraid, still exists here in Jersey. So the Minister talked about, the Minister for Environment, talked about bringing laws into the 21st century. I hadn't realised that some civilised societies had brought similar regulations and laws in the 18th century. We should hang our heads in shame We really should. So, as I said, there are people who lack basic facilities, whose own homes, rather than being a safe environment, are a threat to their health, a threat to their safety and their well-being. The cost to our community of poor standard housing is immense, not only in the health to the community and our children in particular and our older folk, but the cost to the health service in treating conditions which are wholly preventable. So, a little bit of me thinks surely it cannot be right that the states subsidise such substandard accommodation through benefits, but I think that's for another day. But it is vital that we help people to stay in their homes, to live in a safe environment and to live healthy lives. This applies both to, particularly to all of our community, but particularly to the ageing demographic, as it becomes more important that we ensure that they have good housing, that they have the handrails on the stairs that we talked about, that the standards that help them to avoid being ill or obtaining injury. And also, sir, and I know the Council of St John won't agree with me, but also, eventually, that they have good standards of insulation. We've seen evidence of insulation working well at Pomdor Farm. The tenants there, when that building was upgraded, tell me they rarely need to turn the heating on. Until that was done, sir, some winters they were spending £50 a week on supplementary heating. So it is the right thing to be looking at in the future. So our people, our children, our elderly folk deserve the right to live in properties that at least meet the minimum standards. We're not talking about palaces. We're talking about minimum standards. Standards that provide a safe home and a healthy home. Moving on, so the Independent Care Inquiry noted how housing has a marked impact on family life and the well-being for some families in the island. If introducing what is in effect decent home standards to private rental dwellings tackles one of the causes of social inequality and deprivation, promotes the welfare of our children, and I think we were all told that we should put children at the centre of everything that we do, and contributes to giving them the best start in life, then surely we must all welcome this legislation. The ability to license rented accommodation will help to promote high standards and the professionally managed accommodation. This is part of a plan, sir. I heard somebody say, and I can't remember which member it was, I'm not sure if I can support this because it's only one part of what needs to be done. This is part of a 5-suite attack, sir, if you like. We've had the work done on fire safety. We've had the work done on on the deposit scheme. We've had the work done on the tenancy protection. And now these are the final 2 bits of the jigsaw in terms of minimum standards and licensing. When environmental health was part of my remit, I learned of the frustrations felt by the team not being able to bring about improvements in the worst substandard housing. So this team is a team that works more with carrot than with stick. I must say that. They always try and find the way to get people to do things by persuasion rather than stick. But sometimes you need that stick. They need their ability to inspect, to monitor, to improve standards. That has been limited up till now. This draft tool will give them the tools, this draft law will give them the tools to do their job. Let us not find a dozen reasons why we can't support it. And let's find one reason to support it for the sake of islanders. And I urge members to support this proposition.
Deputy Martin.
Thank you, sir. And I'm very disappointed from the last 2 speakers that the minute somebody has stood up, or 2 members of the scrutiny panel, and said, you know, this is not quite what it should be. There's a lot more information out there. And it's not even just looking at the tenant protection. The tenant protection, like the Deputy of St John's, I asked the question last week, which was a very, very good informative briefing from the officers at Environmental Health. But twice it was said, it won't stop the tenant who complains about their bad accommodation being evicted. There's nothing, and there's nothing sort of coming up the line that's going to help them. And we've all been contacted by landlords who have concerns about this, but all they're worried about seems to be is the fee. But they haven't, I don't think they've actually seen how hard it would be for them to go to the Royal Court to change, because it's too much. It shouldn't be the royal court, sir. And this is in the legislation. And I talk for scrutiny when I say that it upsets me when the senator in control of population stands up and says, don't you dare do this. And the former housing minister says, don't you dare do this. Our tenants have waited too long. And then again, and Deputy Russell Labby, sir, said this a few weeks ago, stop trotting out, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, recommendations in the care inquiry, because if you really want to know what the care inquiry was talking about, was a lot of unqualified housing. And the ministers, if they want to do away with some of these areas, they could yesterday or years ago brought something that we don't have a two-tier housing system, but no. Today, the minute scrutiny has said, we want to have a look at this. There isn't a date. Even if it's 4 weeks after they decide next week or 4 weeks today, you'll still have the debate on the 30th of January. It does feel that when there's so much legislation about, so many overarching policies and strategies, which a good Googling from the Deputy St John has produced, that none of these are in the report. And it isn't about, nobody said, even scrutiny who want to call it INSA, that they don't support the principle. Of course we don't want anybody living in this sort of accommodation. But do we want to pass bad laws or bad legislation? I would say no. If I was the minister, welcome the call-in, welcome the input from scrutiny. I know they're very busy, and they probably, it's something that they'll have to do, as you know, quickly and over Christmas probably, but they're willing. So stop the emotional blackmail, sir. Stop saying that, you know, today is the day and we've all seen the light. No, you've seen the light many times. It just hasn't suited you when you were minister of that department to bring in the laws to change it. So I'm sorry, sir. We can all be emotional, but come on, be a bit realistic. You've got an offer here to have this legislate and scrutinise. Take it with open hands. Thank you, sir.
So could I clarify a point the Health Minister made? He said about insulation, and it was something that I was supporting, but I was merely pointing out that in some cases with regards to double glazing, a landlord is not able, because of a listed building, to upgrade his double glazing.
Thank you. Does any member wish to speak? Any other member wish to speak? If not, then
So I don't wish to speak, but just before the Minister sums up, I understand that before I return to the states that a number of members declared an interest as landlords of private dwelling accommodation, and I should like to do the same thing.
Thank you. And I call on the Minister to reply.
Thank you, sir, and I'd like to thank members who've contributed to the debate. I hope I can do justice to their observations and questions. I will, if members would allow me, just run through the list as those people who spoke. Deputy Southern spoke first, and I thank him for his support. I think there'll always be some conflict as to whether ministers should be allowed to do things by order or whether the States Assembly should be allowed to do things by regulation, but nevertheless, I thank him very much for the support he's given. We then moved on to the Constable of St John, and he spoke about tenants, and I acknowledged earlier, and I do it again now, that not all problems are caused by the rented building or by the landlord. Landlords and tenants both have responsibilities, and if damage is caused by a tenant, if condensation is caused by the lifestyle of that tenant, then my team at Environmental Health say so, and they're going to continue to say so. They frequently supported landlords in such cases, and I would point the Constable to this small document, pamphlet, which my department have printed 8,000 leaflets. They've printed 8,000 copies of this on condensation and mould, and that's been distributed widely throughout landlords' agents and directly to tenants. He spoke. The Constable spoke about encouraging landlords, and I agree. We need to encourage landlords to do better. But new accommodation that's built these days will comply because of regulations, bylaws and all that sort of thing. There won't be any problem with the new recently built accommodation. Forcing landlords, well, landlords will only be forced to if they really, really need to be forced to, because it's only accommodation which is sub minimal standards that will need to be improved. A tenants list, well, I'm not so sure about that, but maybe that's something that could be considered by a landlords association. Regular inspection. Well, yes, and this is a two-way street here. Not only is this a regular inspection by inspectors, but landlords have an obligation really to themselves to inspect their properties on a regular basis. The cooker in question that the constable spoke about, I mean, was installed by a landlord. It was hardwired, but it obviously hadn't been inspected for some time to have been dilapidated to that state. And the question that the constable asked about food storage was exactly the same one that I did. And I presumed that the regulator, the bit that says we will the minimum food storage, was a fridge. Actually, what it means is a cupboard to put your food in so you can keep the vermin out and stuff like that. I mean, this is the level. We're not talking about the luxury of a fridge here. We're talking about food storage. It's somewhere to put your food in the kitchen or wherever. Senator Joseph spoke about the high costs, and I can't disagree with him. But one of the things that I very much hope this will do eventually will be to lower the costs to the tenants of their energy bills and to lower the costs to the tenants of their health bills, because better accommodation will allow them both of those. Yes, there are going to be some unintended consequences of this legislation. I accept that. We are going to find things we don't like. We're going to see stuff which we find very unpalatable. But housing, know what we're doing. Andium, no. Social Security, we're all aware of what could happen. Again, Deputy Andrew Lewis, next door to me here, spoke about the same thing. Supply is key here, and the Housing Minister will tell you, and other ministers will tell you, I bash the table. Let's get on and start delivering some of these housing sites. It's all very well passing them, and the agreement goes out from the planning department to build. Well, let's get on and start building. Building is the key, and we know we've got some great schemes coming forward. The Future St Helier work is doing a lot of this, and we know that in the future a lot of this extra additional housing will be in St Helier. And Deputy Lewis spoke about new standards, but we are going to have better, and this work is coming out of planning literally as I speak, new standards on interior space, new standards on amenity space, new standards on parking, and depending what part of the island is, that moves. That's a flexible beast. If you're in the middle of town, you won't need so much parking. You can have more amenity space, more interior space. So we are working on that. Joined up, yes, we are more joined up on this than I think we've ever been, and I know a lot of members referred to it, population debate is something we need to have. If we're going to have more population on this island, we need to address that and work out how we're going to deliver these additional quality homes for those additional people. One of the things that was interesting in the two speeches from Senator Joseph and Deputy Lewis was that one said we've got a lower level of rented people, percentage of rented, and one said we've got a lower level of owned homes. And I think that the interesting thing there is that we don't actually know. And there's no question that when the detail comes through, I'm really hopeful that we will have information in time to inform the Island Plan to 2021, so that as we move forward, we do that from a much better position of knowledge. Deputy Bree spoke about detail before and after, and again, this is another one. How much, if you bring too much detail into the principles, there's very little to do afterwards. If you leave it to, we will always have a debate about how much detail one wants. But the licensing scheme, I can assure the deputy, will come back to the states. That certainly isn't something which will come at a later date. Conflict of human rights. A lot of work, it's already been said, a lot of work was done on human rights here, and as all members know, laws must comply. So there won't be a question ever of something coming to this assembly before it's been checked for human rights compliance. This is about reducing the cost to the tenants and not improving the profits of the landlords. And I accept that there's an issue with listed buildings and windows, and Deputy Bree did say there's a difficult balance to be struck here, and yes, it's a challenge. I accept that. I've got some changes to the general development order coming through on listed buildings very soon. And yes, I accept the criticism from the Deputy that I haven't come forward yet with my supplementary planning guidance update on windows and historic doors in listed buildings. That will be done before the election, and it will happen. And yes, I didn't mention it in my opening speech, but certainly it's in my intention, is that if there is any surplus of funds that accrue from the legislation we've been talking about today, it is my firm intention to allow those funds to return back into the sector which we're talking about today. And that's a continuation of the type of work that we've been doing in the Environment Department on helping people who are less well off to improve their properties. And again, I refer back to, this is about reducing the cost to the tenant, not improving the profits of the landlord. So if we do have some surplus and we put it back in, it will be to low energy light bulbs, it will be into insulation, it will be into things which help the tenant to reduce their costs. Senator Ferguson spoke about lodgers, and I have to say to her, I don't have the answer about the reduction from 4 to 2, but I will find out. She spoke about the ghettos of tomorrow, and again, I agree with the Constable of St Helier. I found that was a little bit unfortunate. The Future St Helier group are doing enormous amount of work to try to improve further the quality of homes and amenities and facilities in St Helier. She spoke about population debate, and again, I've spoken about the need for that, and for that to inform the Island Plan 2021. Could I particularly thank, sir, as ever, the contribution from the Deputy of St John's, who always does her homework and is increasingly knowledgeable about things. She said, can we enforce? Well, yes, we can. We've done our homework, and we've for some time now known that this work is coming down the line. I have to say, I'm disappointed to hear her concerns about the information that she couldn't access. I can only apologise for that. And I'd like to hope that when we get to by the time we get to debate the details, she will have had that. She mentioned how often we've debated this issue in the past. And yes, we have, certainly before my time. But I would like to hope that this time we will really make some progress forward. Will laws be removed? I'm sure some bits will be. And I've already mentioned the lodging house laws, and as we move forward with this, as and where we can remove legislation, I'm sure we wouldn't want to duplicate it. We've spoken, and other members spoke about evictions, and I have to say to members, Deputy Martin spoke about this as well, this law won't prevent evictions. However, it will prevent a landlord from just putting someone else into substandard accommodation after such an eviction. And so I hope it would discourage such practice. Certainly, once the legislation is in place, if someone is evicted, the Minister of the day will be in a position to ban the landlord from reletting that property until improvements have been made. This won't be easy, and as I've said before, when we get into the detail and we start to implement these, we must be prepared for some shocks and some people maybe finding that they don't have properties to live in anymore because we just can't allow them to carry on because of the danger or the consequences on their health. But again, I say to members, Social Security and NDM are aware of this. We talk about protecting tenants, and I have to say that part of the rent safe stuff is that, you know, proper agreements, proper contracts have to be in place, and that works both ways. And if tenants have proper contracts, at least they have something to help them if they need that in the future. I would only hope that the Deputy St John sees that we're more joined up than ever before, and certainly I look forward to working with her in the future to make it even better. I can't speak for the fire service, but what I can do is say that the fire service and my environmental health officers work to very different rules and regulations, and we've done our costings and they've done theirs. I'd like to thank the Housing Minister for her contribution. Supply, supply, supply. We both agree on that, and I will continue to shout the word at her and hope that we can get on and start building. But the thing I would say is, I would stress the point that she made. This is minimum. This is not luxury that we're asking for here. This is minimum standards, basic minimum standards. Deputy Lafondre spoke about access, demand, population and resources, corporate bodies. He spoke about negligence and accidents, and I accept his point that that detail will all come back. We're talking about the principles here today. Deputy Johnson, Deputy St Mary spoke about calling this in, and unlike some of my ministers, I welcome this opportunity to continue working with scrutiny. Deputy Routier, Senator Routier wanted members to resist the temptation to call this in today. Despite that, I'm a great fan of scrutiny, and I look forward to making this legislation even better than it currently is, which is why when Senator Green said this was a good plan, he was right. It's not a perfect plan, but it is a good plan, and I think it can be even better. So I finished with Deputy Martin and called for scrutiny, and I'd just say to members, I look forward to working with scrutiny in the next couple of months to make these principles better. I look forward to working with them in the future to make the regulations, the articles even better as well. So, sir, I commend these principles to the Assembly, and I hope very much that we'll have a unanimous vote to take this forward to the next stage and call for the appel.
Could I ask for a point of clarification from the last speaker? There was a number of questions asked on financial and manpower, and if these teams really do have the manpowers to actually be able to take this on as well. I was going to say that, but I didn't want to duplicate what other people had already mentioned in the Assembly, so I didn't speak, but it would be nice to hear.
In the UK, they've been subject to austerity for quite a while now, and they've had to reduce their number of officers significantly, and that's impacted directly on their ability to enforce. But knowing that we had this work coming down the line, all the people that we've taken on in the environmental health team for the last few years now have had particular knowledge of the subject, and we feel that we have got now some very experienced people in our team. Certainly my director personally knows the authors of reports from the UK dealing directly with housing, health and safety rating schemes, and those schemes are well constructed and evidence-based. Andium staff have been receiving training on this, and that was directly from the authors of these schemes at Warwick University. I can only stress that officers work with landlords to gradually improve the standards of accommodation with proportionate timescales, and I accept the fact that, I've said it and others have said it, we don't really know exactly what we're dealing with here, but we certainly know that in the early stages we have the staff and the capability to deal with it. We've got a piece of software coming down the line which is nearly finished, which we think is going to be of great assistance to us and save us a lot of staff. But we have said all along, and I continue to say today, is if we do find in a while that we're not coping, we will increase the manpower of the team in order to do this work. But we're confident in the short to medium term that we have the staff available to cope.
Yes, sir. That's a clarification from the Minister. The Minister said that if there is surplus, then the money will go back to the same area in his summing up speech. What I was curious about, sir, is that on the basis of, although I'm slightly confused on the basis of what he's just said, the financial and manpower implications of his proposition state there'll be no increase in manpower, which is slightly at odds to what the Minister just said, and that there's no increase to the current Department of Environment financial budgets. Therefore, it's going to be all surplus. Second question, sir, is I'm not aware that this is ring-fenced, so how will he make it go back to the area that he was alluding to?
Well, the estimated income is in the budgets, so it's not all surplus. So we've already estimated that the income is coming into the department, so that it can't all be classed as profit or a surplus. And the only thing I would say is we are confident in the short term we can cope within our existing staff limits and our budget limits, and the forward projections when it comes to finances. And I can't predict into the future where we're going to go. So if in 2 years' time or 3 years' time we do need some more staff, at that point I would envisage that we will have to find a way to pay for it. I accept that what I've said about surplus money, should there be some, going back into the work that we've done with helping with insulation and energy saving. I accept that that's not in there, and I responded that directly to Deputy Bree, who asked the question. It's certainly some thoughts that I've had, and I've been speaking to officers about that before today. But it's not something that I put down in black and white, but it's certainly something I'm happy to say to the Assembly today would be my intention to do. And the answer to the ring fencing is I don't know, but certainly I would be looking for ways for any surplus monies in the future to be held in the department, to be put back into community use in the way I've described. We had monies voted in the last session of government for the Environment Department to help with energy saving schemes, and this is exactly what I'm thinking here for the future would be in exactly the same way that those schemes worked, where we would go into the more vulnerable homes, people without the money to spend, and help them with their property and spend the money in such a way as to save their money and not to profit their landlords.
Well, the appell's been called for. The vote is on the principles of the draft Public Health and Safety Rented Dwellings Jersey Law, P66. Invite members to return to their seats and ask the greffier to open the voting. Members have the opportunity of voting. Ask the greffier to close the voting. Can announce the principles have been adopted. 42 votes in favour and no votes against. Mr. Mary, your panel wishes to scrutinise this legislation.
Yes, could we have a date for the 12th December, please?
To reconsider the...
to bring it back for the debate, sir.
I'm sorry?
To bring it back.
Bring it back for debate on the 12th. Very well. I'm sure the chairman of PPC will notice that.
Is that right?
In the break between propositions, I can announce that I have received an amendment from Senator Ferguson to the JT Group Limited Restructuring of Enterprise, P96, which I'll give notice of. We now come to the draft Building Loans Amendment number 13, Jersey Law, lodged by the Minister for Housing, P79, and ask the greffier to read the citation of the draft.
Draft Building Loans Amendment number 13, Jersey Law 2000, the law to amend further the Building Loans Jersey Law 1950. The State, subject to the sanction of the Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
Minister, you wish to propose the principles?
Yes, sir. This is a relatively minor amendment to the Building Loans Jersey Law 1950, which will bring the method used to calculate loan interest repayments up to date with the modern practice. This law covers loans that have been made to islanders for initiatives such as the assisted home purchase schemes, which the states have operated in the past and which are actively looking to operate again. The Treasury Department has conducted a review of the way it calculates interest on loans and has identified during this review that the current method of calculating interest under the Building Loans Law was antiquated and not in line with modern commercial practice. Currently, the law requires interest repayment loans to be calculated based on the balance of the loan on the 1st of January each year. This is inconsistent with modern practice, so the amendment to the law will enable us to change the way interest is calculated and make it consistent with the regulations accompanying the primary law that allows the Housing Minister to vary the interest calculation method. As I said, this is a relatively straightforward method, and if the amendment is passed, steps will be taken to modernise the calculation method, which will result in a reduction in the amount of interest paid by the 78 households who currently have loans administered under this law. This amendment has the support of the Treasury Minister, whose department administers states loans, and I hope members will support this minor proposition.
Proposition seconded.
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak? All those in favour, Deputy Bree.
Thank you very much, sir. A very quick question is, could the Minister explain to us the actual way in which interest is calculated, or will be, sorry, sir, calculated, should this be approved, and exactly what the difference is between each calculation method? The Minister referred to in her speech bringing things up to a modern standard. I would just be interested to know exactly what that calculation method is. Thank you, sir.
Any other member wish to speak?
Yes, sir.
Deputy Martin.
It's just really a quick question, and the Minister answered part of it in her opening speech. Was about, I think she said there's still, because I actually thought this was defunct, but 78 people are still on this loan scheme. And my question is, that it might be in here, but my glasses are missing somewhere, so I don't think it is, though. When anything is modernised and it's money, some people are winners and normally some people are losers. So have the 78 people been contacted and to find out how this will affect them financially, or have they even been informed there's going to be a change? Thank you, sir.
Anyone wish to speak? I'll call on the Minister to reply.
Sir, to answer the last question first, sir, I'm not sure if they've been contacted, but there are, as I said, there are 78 active housing loans under the 99-year lease, Assisted Homes Purchase Scheme, dwelling loans, and the dwelling houses loan fund, sir. All of them will be winners, because it has the headline rate has been out of date, sir. To answer Deputy Bree's question, that information will come on once this amendment to this law is in place, sir. This amendment allows the calculation to be done.
All members in favour of adopting the principles kindly show. Those against, the principles are adopted. Deputy St. Warren, do you wish to call in this legislation? Do you wish to call in this legislation? Minister, you propose the articles en bloc? Seconded.
Sir.
Any member wish to speak? Those in favour of adopting the articles kindly show. Those against, the articles are adopted. Proposed in third reading, Minister. Seconded. Any member wish to speak? Those in favour of adopting the law in third reading, kindly show. Those against, the proposition, the bill is adopted. We now come to P81, the States of Jersey Budget 2017, allocation to the parishes of funds set aside for the payment of rates on states' properties, lodged by the Conotop of St Helier. I ask the Deputy to read the proposition.
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to agree that by reason of a change in anticipated circumstances, part of the amount approved in the draft medium-term financial plan edition for 2017 to 2019, P68/2016, is no longer required to be expended, specifically that part relating to the payment of rates. B, to request the Minister for Treasury and Resources and the Minister for Infrastructure to take the steps necessary pursuant to Article 18(1)A of the Public Finances Jersey Law 2005 to transfer the sum of £899,960.48, no longer required for the payment of rates by the states in 2017, to contingency expenditure. C, to request the Minister for Treasury and Resources to transfer £899,960.48 to the parishes by way of ex gratia payments as set out below. Parish Grouville 3386/78, St Brelard 41,897/48, St Clement 25,628/54, St Helier 642,130 £642,130.47, St John £3,339.46, St Lawrence £4,212.38, St Martin £6,526.17, St Mary £2,756.95, St One £5,027.93, St Peter £8,926.62, St Saviour £148,390.24, Trinity £7,737.46, making a total of £899,960.48.
Thank you, sir. So members have had my report, which I think is clear and self-explanatory and logical. I would say that, wouldn't I? They will note that we've had no comments back. I've, as a backbencher, have had no comments back from anyone about it, neither from Treasury nor Council of Ministers, nor from my fellow constables. So I'm assuming, perhaps naively, that nobody has any comments to make and everyone supports it. Indeed, I was grateful to the Deputy Greffier, I've got that right, Assistant Greffier, if I've got it wrong, the Assistant Greffier for reading the individual amounts proposed to each parish, because it makes it quite clear that all 12 parishes stand to receive something if this unspent rates money is allocated in the way that I'm proposing. I will just refer to the number of years this has been going on. I won't make a big thing about it, other than to note that at least one member of the States was in short trousers when I started down this particular road, possibly more. Also, when I was digging my file, I found this interesting piece of crumpled paper which says the committee, this is referring to the Finance and Economics Committee, for members who weren't in the States before ministerial government, we were run by committees and not by ministers. And Finance and Economics said this: the committee accepts that in the interests of fairness and transparency, there is a strong argument that the States should pay rates on its land and property. There was then a caveat about how that would be afforded. Despite the above, the committee concludes that the disproportionate location of States' properties in St Helier, St Saviour and St Peter creates significant costs for those parishes, and the committee would like to address this issue as a priority. That's a word we've been using quite a lot recently when we talked about the strategic plan, about the strategic priorities of the states. There's then another caveat about the pressures on states' income, but the concluding paragraph in this committee act is as follows: the committee will undertake to provide firm recommendations with regard to the state's rates liability when the island-wide rate has been introduced and assessed and the economic effects of the fiscal strategy are more clear. The committee anticipates that this will be possible during 2007. 10 years ago. 10 years ago, this was proposed, and of course, we didn't need to explore why it's never happened. And of course, we got so close to it, tantalizingly close to it, in the last budget debate, when, somewhat paradoxically, the states approved the more difficult part, which was the provision of sustainable finances for the states paying rates, but actually turned down the payment of rates for the current year, 2017. And as I set out in my report, sir, there was a wish to spend that money that had been allocated on the parishes through DFI, providing projects. But as the year went on, it became clear that this was going to be difficult. Certainly by the time we got to the summer, when we're already halfway through the year that these states' rates money had been allocated, a sounding by the Minister of DFI got fairly short shrift with the responses that I saw saying that if there is going to be this states' rates money for 2017, then let the parishes decide what to do with it in the normal way, which is what they do with their rates income. More seriously, I was informed that my proposition that this money be allocated to project work was probably was probably ultra vires. So accordingly, I went to see the Attorney General. I'm grateful to him and his staff, who puzzled quite a long time to try and find a way of solving this particular problem, how to release these funds, which have been placed in a particular budget for the purposes of the states paying rates. The states, by 3 votes, had decided not to accept, not to pass on that money, and so what were we to do with the money? And they helped me come up with the present proposition, P81, which simply passes the money over to the parishes in an ex gratia way and allows the parishes, in their wisdom, to work out what to do with it. And as I've suggested in the closing paragraph, certainly for St Helier, with a large sum of money, it's a matter that I would put before ratepayers to say, well, how do you think this money should be spent? But there are clearly a number of infrastructure projects, including a village improvement scheme in Havre de Pau, which has been long anticipated by the residents, which DFI are poised, I believe, to assist in the delivery of, which I would certainly want to commend to ratepayers and get that work underway. Now, I know some members may have a problem with ex gratia payments. I was looking back into the sort of annals of backbenchers' propositions, and way back in 1999, I brought a proposition, I think it was my second, to make an ex gratia payment to the owners of a guest house whose guest house was being undermined by States Works next door. And the same worries were raised then about ex gratia payments, but they were overcome and that payment was made. Now, I haven't in the last nearly 20 years seen a flood of private members' bills asking for money to be paid to private dwellings that have been undermined by States developments. Happily, that's probably because it doesn't happen very often. But the point I'm making, sir, is that if this is approved, I don't believe it does set a precedent that ex gratia money will be requested by backbenchers any more often. Indeed, I would certainly hope that as far as the state's paying rates is concerned, that this is a one-off, this is a blip, this is a decision that we almost made to set aside this money, and what I'm suggesting we do now is that we pass across that money, so effectively we are getting a chance to reconsider our decision in the budget of last year, the budget debate last year, to allocate states' rates money this year. So, sir, I would commend this proposition to the states and ask that at long last the states commit to their agreement that rates should be paid on states' properties, that we effectively enact the Council of Ministers' preferred route of improving St Helier in the strategic plan by making rates payable on their properties, and we start it this year. Thank you, sir.
Proposition seconded. There's an amendment lodged by the Minister for Infrastructure. Referee, read the amendment, please.
Page 2, paragraph C. For the words parishes by way of ex gratia payments, substitute the words Department for Infrastructure to be spent on infrastructure projects in each of the parishes.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I brought this amendment as a compromise option for members. I do not support the making of ex gratia payments unless in extreme circumstances where there is no other route possible. However, I would like the parishes to benefit from the funds allocated in 2017 for rates, and I see this amendment affording an alternative but acceptable route rather than using an ex gratia payments. Members will know that DFI undertake a lot of work in the parishes, and sometimes not as much as the constables would like, but I'm sure that they fully appreciate that there are restricted to the amount of resources that we have available. There's always more that we could do if we had the funds. This amendment would indeed give us more funds to do some modest projects in each of the parishes in the same ratio as the 2017 rates distribution would have been. We would, of course, do this in consultation with each constable. So, for example, St Helier would get their £640,000, but the money could be spent on future St Helier projects such as Havre de Pau, which would be for the benefit of all. There's certainly not a lack of enthusiasm for schemes, but the funding is always a limiting factor. Just as an aside, this year, members will appreciate that we've already undertaken pedestrian improvements in St Helier and Conway Street and the pedestrianisation of Charing Cross. And these projects are already making a difference and improving people's safety, ease of access, and definitely is a benefit to the parishes. Another example is obviously would benefit St Saviour's would benefit from almost £150,000, and the constable and I and parish representatives are looking at various parish schemes to implement next year, mainly around road safety. But we do have our own budgets available for such matters, but an extra £150,000 with us will enable us to jointly extend the scope of those projects. Members will know that there's no shortage of projects on our list to do, our to-do list, but we do have to continually prioritise. But I said the main reason for bringing this amendment, sir, is the aversion of making ex gratia payments when there are workable alternatives, and I believe that this amendment offers members a choice to provide a workable alternative arrangement without actually making and setting a precedent about ex gratia payments. I maintain the amendment, sir.
The amendment seconded. Does any member wish to speak on the amendment? Hudson Martin.
Yes, sir. I'm not sure if maybe give me advice first. Speaking on the amendment alone, I think my comments relate to both issues at the same time, sir.
Well, we're not going to have two debates on the main proposition.
I won't speak twice.
I think if members can confine their remarks on the amendment to the amendment, that would be in accordance with standing orders.
I had initial concerns back in the beginning of August when the DFI Minister, Department for Infrastructure Minister, Deputy Knoll, notified members with what appeared on the initial reading to be a good news, great news story, and that was in relation to P61, the 2017, the Constable of St Heliers' original proposition that he was to eventually withdraw. The possibility of a donation, a gift to the parish of St Martin's of some £6,500, or another way, it was 0.01p on our set quarters, or a reduction of that, because about £5,000 is the reduction of 0.01p. The Minister ended his correspondence to members of the good news story with some caution. And members will recall that, saying that it might be a misuse of funds voted for a particular purpose, and possibly to be seen in due course by the Controller and Auditor General as against the spirit of what the states intended to do to pay the parishes rates on their properties. Well, I'm sorry, sir, of course it was. This rang alarm bells with me, and I'm not sure the views of other members at the time, except a couple of them who shared email responses to the Minister that were copied to all members. And I think we should all take time to reflect on what is happening today, or might happen today. Surely it cannot be right that money set aside for something is used for something else. We could do that for everything on our annual budgets. Where would or where could we stop? I think on a minor scale, with my annual parish budget in St Martin's, when our parishioners attend a rates meeting, a rates assembly in late July, each year they agree the estimates for each section of our annual budget, be that policing, the Tresor vote, staff salaries, named reserve funds, our refuse collection. I can't go back the following year at the rates assembly and say, well, we only spent half of our honorary police budget, and we only resurfaced 8 roads instead of 12 by our parish roads committee, and we decided to heat the church for 3 months instead of 5. So we didn't spend all the Tresor budget, and we therefore used that money that we didn't spend for the purpose we intended last year, and we decided to decorate my office and put a shower in and a television and a sofa. It could not happen, sir, and something that should not happen. The money goes back at the end of the year into the accounts that is not used for items and that were not agreed by the parishioners at that previous rates assembly. And I think of the scenarios mentioned earlier this morning by Senator Ferguson, I think, and the Chief Minister, the prudent housewife, and we didn't say the prudent husband or the prudent partner, but the Senator also mentioned how the constables run their budgets, and that's how we do it. It is a starting point for the money in hand at the end of the year for setting the rate for the following year. Moral conflicts apart and possibly legal aspects are set aside, the Minister realised in mid-August that this we would not be able to proceed as he had suggested, and he withdrew the suggestion that he'd offered to members. He sent that out by email to all of us. For those reasons, and for the time reasons as well that I've just explained, he cited that DFI would be unable to identify, plan and implement the vast majority of possible projects. And this was as long ago as the 14th of August. And the other points I'd like to raise today during the speech, sir, is that we're talking about a department, the Department for Infrastructure, that has seen its own budget cut drastically and having to make massive savings for the forthcoming year. and secondly, also seen proposed income sources not materialise, liquid waste, solid waste charges as an example. We're talking about Estates of Jersey as a government, a target of saving money in any case. And unfortunately today the Treasury Minister can't be with us to make his views known on the saving of £900,000. If I just go back to my parish example I've spoken about, we don't just spend it because it hasn't been spent. So voting against the Constable's proposition, and I won't go on to that part because I know we're going to come back to that, has not made one parish, I'm not speaking today because one parish will receive more than a parish of St Martin's, for example. Shouldn't go into that. We're talking, the Minister has gone into the percentage-wise as what would be the rates money that the states would have spent on rates. Well, I don't know if that's fair to start with, but that's an aside. It's for the reasons I've already stated. Anyway, I'll go back now. The Minister seems to have had second thoughts during the summer, and he's given us this olive branch today, the best way forward that he thinks, his summer suggestion having not been progressed. But he's come back to the Assembly today, as I would have had to do at a parish assembly, if I wanted to use parish funds for something that was not agreed by the parish assembly at the rates assembly. And he's asking members whether they would be minded to use the money set aside for the rates payments on infrastructure projects of their own, this is DFI projects, and of course having to have consultation with the Conitubs. Well, apart from the time his department now seems to have found to add to the work, which he said he couldn't find in August because it was too late, we're now 3 months down the line. All I can say, so my initial reaction to the amendment was that I had a greater comfort, as is the process that I've had to do an additional parish assembly, re-diverting money for parish projects. Something a little bit further than the original proposition by the Constable of St Helier. However, thinking about it since then, sir, and in particular the last few days, I have grave concerns. Is this any more than the state's paying rates for 2017, but just by another method? It remains spending money that could have been a saving of nearly £1 million, a saving of nearly £1 million. And the longer we sit in this assembly, such figures, unfortunately and sadly, tend to be seen as insignificant sums on the grand scale of things. Well, I don't think so. £1 million is a lot of money to me. £900,000 is a lot of money. So this is public money, not our money, and we don't need to spend it for the sake of it. And whilst thanking the Minister for the olive branch that he's given us, I ask members today to think carefully before voting to support either this amendment or the proposition. I thank the Constable of St Helier and the Minister for giving us the opportunity to debate it, but I'm unable to support either, sir. Thank you.
Well, Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. I strongly oppose this amendment, and I urge the states to reject it and instead to support the proposition unamended from the Constable of St Helier. I don't agree, I think, with anything that was made in the argument in his opening from the DFI Minister. He said that this was meant to be some sort of compromise, and I simply don't agree with that, because I think this aims to deliver something which is manifestly completely unlike what states members would have anticipated when we initially indicated our support for the states paying rates. He said that part of this amendment comes from an aversion to ex gratia payments, and I can sort of understand where he's coming from there. I think as a principle, we don't necessarily want to open the floodgates to all sorts of propositions to make random payments on no sort of consistent basis. I understand that, but I think the chance of this proposition opening the floodgates must surely be nil. There must be no chance of that doing that, because this is a very unique circumstance that we find ourselves in, which I presume will never happen again. We're not going to end up in a situation where there is money left over because of some speed bumps along the way that have made it difficult to get the states to pay rates in the first instance. This isn't going to happen again, so I don't think there's any chance of this being anything other than a one-off. and I think it's a very worthy one-off given the situation we're in. But also because it will direct the money to a state's department to essentially spend the money how it wants. And okay, the minister has said that he would agree to spend the money in proportion to each parish, and that's good, and I certainly don't doubt his word on that. But it would ultimately be the state's department that would decide how that money gets spent, and that is not the intention that we would have initially anticipated when this first became an issue for the states over whether parish rates would be paid or not. The reason that I want the states to be paying this money directly to the parishes is because I want the parishes to decide where the money is best spent. I think it's a general positive principle of local government, whether that's local government in Jersey or anywhere else, which is that those who are closest to the people who are affected by decisions get to make those decisions with greater democratic accountability and more in line with the community of which they are a member. They are there at the front line seeing it. And in each different parish, they'll have different things that they'll want to focus on, and the possibilities for what they can spend the money on might be quite exciting. And I know that in various different parishes, they have some really interesting and positive things that they're involved in. I know St Clement is particularly proud of some of the work they do as the parish, supporting vulnerable people in their community. That's something that would be great to see them helped with extra money that they could potentially choose to spend on that if they wanted, or they could spend it on something else. But it would be down to the constable, the procurers, perhaps the roads committee as well, the people who are closest to having that democratic accountability for the people who will be affected by that. So I don't think what the Minister is proposing is a compromise, because it is so far detached from what the initial aim of this was. And I think it's a basic principle of democracy that the money should be going to those who are accountable to their parishes and who can make that decision, and the parishioners can hold them to account on it through parish assemblies or elections. Whereas people in 11 out of 12 of these parishes have no ability to hold the DFI minister to account. So I think this is so far detached from what was initially proposed. I can't support it. I hope members will reject it, and I hope instead they will back the proposition unamended from the Constable of St Helier.
Deputy Wickington.
Thank you, sir. I'm happy to follow the last speaker. I too do not agree that this could be called a compromise. I call it a reversal in some ways. I was concerned when I got the email from the DFI Minister in August. It said, I've repeatedly voiced that I would like to use the 900,000 on infrastructure projects for each parish in the same ratio as the states had paid rates this year. The projects would be decided upon by DFI after liaising with each constable. What if DFI disagree with what the constable wants? The power to do use what the money spent on will sit with DFI. So if we want a half-to-pie improvement on the roads, you say, well, I'd love to help you out there, but I want to move the refuse from Belazan to Le Colette, and that's for the parish, so I'm going to agree that that's a parish project. There would be nothing the constable could do. I think to call this a compromise is maybe a step too far, because it's actually just reversing the decision. It's keeping the power where it already is right now before this proposition. So I can't support this amendment. I feel that from the information that I've been given in front, it doesn't go to the spirit of what the constable's asking for. I think that the money comes from taxes from the people that live in the parishes. It's going to be spent on the people that pay their taxes in the parishes, and certainly with the lion's share going to St Helier, where you could probably say easily 90% of this island uses St Helier in some way, shape or form, whether it's nighttime economy, whether it's going to the harbour, whether it's going to work, shopping. That's not an unfair thing to say. So I will not be supporting this amendment, but I would ask people to support the proposition. I think it's absolutely right.
Any other one wish to speak?
Yes, sir. I was one of those who initially voted against, for the simple reason when we were discussing this, all of a sudden it was thrown in that the roads were going to be land. And I didn't agree with that because we had already decided that the states were going to pay rates on the buildings, and my parish, St Saviour, had already allocated the space on the computer for the rates department, and we knew exactly what we were going to do. It was just going to be a case of pressing the button and everything was going to forward it. But because of my vote, it was altered. But it is still on there, and I am going to go against this because there are things in the parish that we want to do. And when I went back to the Roads Committee and the parish and said, everything is now altered and we're going to have this 150,000 almost, they said, wonderful, we've got this we want to do, we've got this we would like to do. And I said, well, that's fine. The Constable of St Helier and myself have spoken, and we don't have, not that we had a problem. I said, I'm with him all the way, and this is going to be wonderful. Last week we had a scrutiny meeting with the deputy, and Deputy Montfort Tadier, who's on the panel with me, brought this up quite indirectly. And it was mentioned that I had voted against, and I said yes, and I explained why initially I had voted against. And then we were told we were digressing, and that was knocked on the head. But at the end of the meeting, as the deputy left the building, the deputy who is now bringing this amendment, he said, oh, by the way, I brought an amendment. And I was absolutely fuming, because it could have been mentioned there what he was going to do. But no, that was another backhanded way of them getting our money. This is parish money. I have promised my parishioners they are going to get it, and they are going to get it. And we are going to spend it on what we want, not what the deputy thinks he would like. I wish the Council of Ministers would just stop moving the goalposts and stay with what they promised everybody in the first place. So I am not going to be voting for this amendment, but I'm going to stay with the Constable of St Helier and vote for what he wants and for what my St Saviour's parishioners want and deserve.
Constable St Clement.
Sir, just very briefly, I think I should remind the Assembly that not one constable, not one parish has come to this Assembly to ask for this money. Only the Constable of St Helier, undoubtedly the richest parish in the island on assets and on cash. But the fact that we have not come to ask for it, it would be wrong, I think, to use this money, which is taxpayers' money, for parish projects rather than for island-wide projects if this money is lying around looking for it to be spent. If the states really want to spend this money on parish projects rather than island-wide projects, I'm fine. But the distribution, I suggest, as suggested by the Minister, is wrong. It should not be based, the amount each parish has spent on its infrastructure projects shouldn't be based on a rates distribution which the states have rejected. I mean, that seems to be some sort of flawed logic there. You know, the states have agreed they're not going to pay rates for 2017 at least, but we're going to distribute the money on the basis that we would have done. Now, you know, infrastructure projects, you will get some pretty decent ones in St Helier on this basis and in St Saviour. Not a lot for £2,000 in St Mary, or for £4,000 in St, or £3,000 in St John, £4,000 in St Lawrence. You know, it really is rather a silly way of talking about infrastructure projects. We all need, if the money's going to be done this way, we all need to bid for what we want to do, and in conjunction with the infrastructure department, we decide what would be appropriate. What I'm saying is, if this money is going to be spent on infrastructure projects, then it needs to be prioritised on what is really needed rather than what would be nice to do. Thank you, sir.
Senator Roseff.
Thank you, sir. I rise to oppose the amendment brought by the Infrastructure Minister on a number of different grounds. And like others, there's some remarks which can be made about this proposition, which means that I won't have to say them again in the main proposition. An ex gratia payment is, I'm told, because I've got an Apple, I've got an iPad, so I can look up meanings of words. And it tells me, the Oxford English Dictionary tells me that an ex gratia payment is Latin, and it is most often used in a legal context, and it is when something has been done ex gratia, it is being done voluntarily. In law, an ex gratia payment is for the payment made without the giver recognizing any liability or obligation. Now, of course, that has to be the right way, because the constable's original proposition was defective, because, of course, it called upon the states to pay rates on their property when the law wasn't there. So we had this slight, if I may say, blip, this technicality last year, where I'm quite sure if it would have been not with the confusion of the roads, and I'll come to a irritating fly swat that the constable has previously used in a second, but effectively, if we wouldn't have had the sort of irritation of this road thing, I'm sure that it would have been approved. And I can see, and I was delighted to follow the Constable of St Saviour, who quite rightly says that this must be, she is the Constable of the second largest recipient of monies, has the burden. I really do take exception to the Chairman of the Committee of Constables, the Constable of St Clements, saying that St Helier is the island's richest parish. And what's the difference of rich, sir? Well, rich may be that they have more commercial rates, they have more houses, they have more people, but rich doesn't mean to say that they are better off. How dare he, sir, say that they are rich when the parish of St Helier and St Saviour is burdened with the great amount of excessive, in comparison to others, states buildings, and receives nothing for them, yet has to deal with all the servicing that is associated with servicing those offices and those schools, additional drains on resources of roads, of rubbish collection, of all the other things. The Constable of St Helier has for years campaigned for this, and there has been, I've mentioned Dr. John Kelleher's book, The Triumph of the Countryside, before. I understand his book is to be republished shortly. And of course, there has been for years this debate about the town and the country. And here we go again. The Constable of St Helier, I got a transcript from the Gref, which I had transcribed from the debate in 2005 of the rates law. And the Constable of St Helier says, and I quote, before giving Sir my enthusiastic support for this, which was actually the introduction of this new arrangements for unified rating systems and the introduction of commercial rates, he said he wanted to swat an irritating fly that is buzzing around my ear and does so every time we debate this subject. The Deputy of St John every time does this. Now, of course, I'm not talking about the current Deputy of St John. He wasn't. I was talking about a previous one. Every time there was a proposition that dared to suggest that the Constable of St Helier wanted fairness for his parishioners, or the Constable of St Saviour wanted fairness for her, or previously his parishioners, they were swatted by arguments of unfairness. It's blatantly unfair. It's got to be sorted. And if an ex gratia payment is the recognition that there isn't the law yet, because we didn't manage to get it done last budget, but it is effectively, there is no precedent of an ex gratia payment being a worrisome issue for the Minister for Infrastructure or the Council of Ministers. There is no worry. This is a ex gratia one-off payment because we didn't fix a decision that we had made to put in the MTFP the payment of rates to the parish. We haven't got the legal mechanism. So do you know what? We're doing an ex gratia payment. We're doing an ex gratia payment as a one-off because the money is there, and I'm sorry to say to the Constable of St Martin, this isn't money lying around. It's money allocated for the dealing of the unfair burden that his parish does not have, but I'm afraid that other parishes do. His parish has a total of £6,500 worth of state's property in his parish. St Helier has £642,000 worth of commercial property and other property of the states, of which they get nothing. I'm sorry, it is just not fair. And it's not money lying around. It is undoing, redressing an unfairness that has been in place for years. It used to be the unfair welfare burden that was burdened by St Clement. It would be it would be a different argument today if we were dealing with the unfair welfare burden that used to be burdened by the constable, which used to be also of benefit to a problem to the constable of St Clement today. He'd be on the other side of the debate, because he, of course, only gets £25,000 if he gets his rates. He had a massive welfare burden, much more than that when we dealt with that. Now, because it's St Helier, and there just seems to be this sort of St Helier, St Saviour versus the others, I hope the Constable of St Bullards, who's looking at £41,000 for certainly some nice parish improvements there, they should be allowed, on this ex gratia payment basis, an amount agreed in the MTFP. Yes, the law isn't there, but the agreement in principle was made in the MTFP. The law did not come because of a technicality last year, and I'm sure we're going to sort it out this time with the budget, and there are budget amendments to do that. There's also going to be the other proposals to find the money for the resources to pay for it as well. I know some constables don't like that, but I'm afraid there has been already an extant decision to agree revaluation of commercial properties, and I'm going to bring an amendment in order to do that. And if the other parishes don't want to do it, that's fine. It can happen in St Helier and St Saviour willingly, and I'm glad to see that the Constable of St Saviour is nodding in agreement, because that's actually going to be fair and reasonable, particularly for retailers, hospitality and others, and it'll be the officers that'll pay. So there's no precedent for an ex gratia payment that's going to be problematic. This doesn't happen often. It certainly shouldn't happen again. It's been an unfairness for years. We've agreed the budget. It's an ex gratia payment because we haven't got the law in place. Let's just agree and pay it. And let the parishes decide, and not others, through their rates. It's not just the parish constable that's going to decide. It is going to have to be an allocation made to a parish, and it's going to be a parish assembly that will vote on the project. Now, that is democracy that's far better than the democratic principle of, if I may say, to the greatest of respect, TTS. I like very much the TTS minister, the infrastructure minister. I like him very much, sir. He's a really nice chap.
So the TTS minister doesn't exist?
Sorry, it's a TTS, so it's the infrastructure minister. He's a really nice chap, sir. I know he's a very reasonable, nice chap. But I'm sorry, it's going to be more democratic if it's the parish assemblies that receive this money and decide how it is going to be spent, because that's how parishes work, and that's how parish democracies work, and that's what we should do. We should reject this proposition, and we should enthusiastically and universally agree what we agreed in the MTFP to give the parishes the money that they have not had for years, and their parishes are worse off. And they're not richer because of it, I say to the Constable of St Clement. How dare he? They're not richer, they are poorer. They're poorer for their infrastructure, for their all sorts of other, their general realm. And I urge members to vote against this proposition and support the underlying proposition in large numbers.
Any other member wish to speak? Then, Chief.
Thank you, sir. We're having an interesting debate, and I will find myself perhaps in an interesting place. The Constable, when he moved his proposition, I think very rightly reflected on the history of this decision or the need for the states to pay rates. And that's just been eloquently explained by Senator Azef why it is the right decision to do that. And this Assembly made a decision in the past and then overturned it. And we've just heard from one of those individuals who voted against that decision. We wouldn't be here where we are today if some of those votes against were in favour of what was being proposed. So we've just heard there's one vote changed. But so I also see there are quite a number of heads down. And we heard another colleague say why he felt it was the wrong thing to move the money full stop. It wasn't supporting the amendment, wasn't moving the money full stop. So it's in the spirit of trying to move this particular issue forward that the Minister for Infrastructure and myself agreed that we should present this position to the Assembly as perhaps a step that those who are still not convinced about the need to pay rates, but are convinced that infrastructure projects around the parish are the right approach to take. And those who are concerned that parishes may use it as would be their as would be right to reduce their rate if they so wish, or as we've heard from the Constable of St Saviour, officials have got a number of projects on which they'd like to spend this money. But we have to break and we have to move through the blockage that we have found ourselves in over the years. And I fear, sir, and perhaps and I hope I'm going to be wrong, that we might have people voting against the amendment for all the good reasons that have been explained, and then people voting against the actual proposition to give the money to the parishes as well, because they are still to be convinced about the state paying rates and the mechanism to transfer that money and the mechanism to raise that money. So Senator Asif, I think, rightly said that there should be a reasonably straightforward mechanism of revaluation. And again, I know some of my colleagues don't like that and have opposed it. And if that is simply a revaluation in St Helier or St Saviour, and if there's a need for a slight uplift, then to cover the transfer of rates costs, that's the direction we should be going in. But I stand here, sir, and I know that that's not a universally accepted direction. And in fact, sir, sometimes we don't always say in this Assembly the difficulties that some of our colleagues face. And I know that the Constable of St Helier has faced difficulties with his other colleagues in trying to build a consensus, if you can call it a consensus when there's only one person on your side, I'm not sure, but there's now two. Trying to build that consensus about moving the issue forward, because it's one of those issues where everybody seems to agree in principle or has done, but then when it comes down to actually doing something, putting one's hand in one's pocket, deciding on how the money should be spent, or delegating that decision to the parishes, suddenly gets a lot more difficult. So I am, for that reason, supporting this small step, even though I understand and accept the reasons that speakers have said about taking the great plunge. I just hope, sir, that they are today, if we're not taking the small step, going to persuade enough people to take the great plunge instead. I'm happy to take a small step in the first instance. If it's defeated, then plunge I think it has to be. Thank you, sir.
Any other member wish to speak? Deputy Martin.
Yes, thank you, sir. I will be brief, and I appreciate what the Chief Minister thinks he's trying to do, but I just think that this amendment muddied the waters for me because, and I don't actually agree, sir, with what he said about the principle of, to me, has been established that everybody thinks that the state should pay rates. It was just a bad law when it came back, and again, if that had had a good scrutiny on it, it may have got through, or issues raised earlier than when it came to the debate. I won't sort of labour on this amendment too much. It's just wrong that this money is there, and it would have been gone to the parishes if the rates were paying rates. This is just money that now sits in a pot It just happens to be an infrastructure minister, and I don't want him to be able to have the final say, as Deputy Wickham says, on the things that the parishes want to do. I probably won't support this. It was very interesting, sir, to hear I weren't sure which way the Constable of St Clement was going, but he seemed to think that if it was passed, the calculations then weren't right. So did he want it divided by 12, so St Clement's may get more? There was probably a move. There could have been moves for amendments, but this is what it would have looked like if the states had gone through and the parishes had got their rates. So it's simple. It's all about a little bit of, to me, a bit of control, one step too far with the infrastructure minister. As it was said earlier, and I have to repeat, it's a parish assemblies, the people who see what's going on in their parish, even the bigger parishes, they attend, they know how to spend the money. The projects are normally, whether they're infrastructure or not, come in probably more cost efficient, a bit cheaper, and normally on time. And I'm looking at the infrastructure minister, and St Helier Parish does work with his workers, and we do a lot of good work. But this, to me, is just one step too far. The money should come, and that it should be for each constable to take it to their parish assembly to be able to spend it. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Vondran.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I'm very much of the view that I won't be supporting this amendment. I will be supporting the main proposition. I think that's consistent with my stance in the last 12 and a half years I've been in the Assembly, and I also speak as a past chairman of a panel or board that was set up by the then Treasury Minister, Senator Lesueur, on which the Constable of St Helier will remember. And I think that was 2006 or 2007, with a very strong and clear recommendation that the state should pay rates. And I think that's actually been my stance even before I came into politics, and I regard it very much as a principle of a level playing field. There are organisations out there and businesses out there and whatever that effectively perform exactly the same function as organisations within the states or departments in the states. One pays rates, one doesn't. So it should be consistent, and therefore the state should be paying rates, and it will make them actually start thinking about empty properties and things like that, in my view. It's a step. But certainly in relation to this amendment, I think actually it shouldn't be that if the money is, if the states, which the states have done a number of times, have approved the principle of paying rates. We have done that a number of times. That vote has been passed. The money this time has been allocated. Therefore, the principle has been accepted that the money should go to the parish. It isn't under the control of a state's department. And therefore, in my view, this amendment shouldn't be supported. The main proposition should be. I will just say I had my definite reservations about the last time around. I can't remember if it was in the MTFP or the budget. I've lost the plot on that in terms of when it happened. But in my view, it was made overly complicated, very difficult to administer, and in fact, I don't think actually was in the spirit of the principle that the states had previously adopted. In other words, the states paying rates. And that was why it went out. One could say that was the way it was designed. I don't know on that front. It may have been just somebody making it very complicated, but it didn't work. But the basic principle should be the states pay rates, and therefore I have absolutely no problem with the principle of ex gratia payment, but I think it should be under the control of the parish. Therefore, I'm rejecting this amendment. I'm supporting the proposition.
Any other members to speak? If not,
Sir.
Deputy Green.
Thank you very much, sir. I've listened with interest on the debate on this amendment, and I'm still at a complete loss to understand why on earth this amendment was brought in the first place. If you agree with the parishes receiving rates on the state's properties, that should be left for the debate we're going to have on the main proposition, amended or not. So really, what is the point of this amendment? Well, it would appear to be to attempt to wrest control out of the parish's hands and put it into infrastructure, so that infrastructure can decide for themselves what projects each parish will have. after consultation, of course, with the constable. And I am at a loss to understand why the minister would seek to take control of that money. If the states have agreed in principle that the states will pay rates on their buildings, then those rates are owed to the parish in which that building sits. And it is up to each individual parish to decide, as it does at the parish assembly, what it is going to do with the rates income it receives. It is not, in my opinion, sir, up to the Minister for Infrastructure to dictate at the end of the day, which is what it will be, what each parish will receive. So I would urge members to throw this amendment out and get back to the important debate, which is on the allocation to the parishes of the funds set aside for the payment of rates. Thank you, sir.
So I'll be very, very brief. It saddens me actually to vote against the infrastructure minister, because I've always had a very close relationship with, not too close relationship, but good relationship with the infrastructure minister, and we've done some really good work together, which makes me even sadder to have to vote against this. But to be clear, I'm not treating this as rates income. It's as simple as that. If it's an ex gratia payment, call it what you want. It comes with no strings attached, and it's not, for me, rates income. The important point, I think, in regards to voting against this, is that I think people have already said it a couple of times, that it is, for me, a parish assembly decision as to where that money is spent. I think the money is given within that spirit, that it's for the parishes to decide, and I agree with Senator Rose in regards to that. But if I had to accept, and there was no other choice but to accept this this amendment, then I would accept it, because I know I can work with the gentleman behind me, and I know I can trust him to do what he says. But I've got my other comments really will be around the main proposition. But like I say, I can't support this amendment, and urge people to reject it.
Thank you, sir. There have been some excellent speeches on the amendment, and I'm particularly grateful to Senator Ossoff, who prevented me from leaping to my feet midway through the debate on the amendment when he took the chairman of the Committee of Constables to task for the way he described St Helier. I think, having said that, of course, the Constable of St Clement was right to query the logic of the amendment, because if, as some members believe, rates shouldn't be paid by the states this year, then why treat this unspent sum as if they were going to be spent this year? So he's right to say the amendment is illogical. The amendment, it seems to me, sir, almost invalidates the proposition. It must have been a close call when you considered it, because effectively the amendment leaves the money of the state should be paying in rates, as every business and domestic ratepayer in the island pays their rates bills every year. Some of them get stung with the late payment. Some of them recently have, I know, in certain parishes. But everybody in the island pays their rates bills, except the states, actually. Yeah. And the states have been avoiding that duty for many, many years. We agreed in the strategic plan the states would start paying rates. We agreed in the MTFP they would start paying rates in 2017. And then, to use the rather nice phrase by Senator Ossoff, there was a blip. In the last budget debate, various red herrings were dragged across the path of the debate, and by 3 votes, the states decided not to spend that money on paying rates this year. I make no bones about it. So my amendment is an attempt to get the states to reverse that decision and to pay rates this year. I must say, disappointed with the Chief Minister's speech. I thought he was going to do something. I thought he was going to make a big step when he stood up and said he was going to upset people, because I thought he was going to upset his minister. I thought he was going to be a big step Chief Minister and not a small step Chief Minister. And I think he should be bold. He should accept the fact that we've made the decision to pay rates this year. And so it is not right to leave the money with the States Department. The states, after all, just look at the last couple of weeks. What do the public think about the states' ability to spend money wisely? I'm not going to give examples, and these don't all fall at the minister's door, although one might look at the cost of the seaweed conference and ask why that was so expensive. But the fact is that we all know, and Senator Ferguson said it this morning, that the constables and the parishes use their funds wisely. And so I say to members, don't put this state's rates money for 2017 back in the state's pocket. Put it in the parish's pocket so the parishes can decide what to do with it. Thank you, sir.
Any other members to speak? If not, I call on the Minister to reply.
Thank you, sir. We've had a good debate this afternoon, which I'm grateful. So this isn't about whether or not the states pay rates or not. We've had that debate, and the states are going to pay rates. This is about whether or not we make an ex gratia payment. And I'm uncomfortable with making ex gratia payments, which is why I offered members this as a genuine compromise, whereby states members can still get the money to the parishes to do things for the parishioners and islanders, which has been my stance ever since the vote last December, and I've said that a few times publicly, and I've said it in emails and correspondence to the constable. As I said, it's not about the states paying rates. The states are going to pay rates. The states do already, in fact, pay rates. I believe my department pays in excess of £300,000 a year currently in rates on certain properties. So it's not about that. It's about whether or not we're comfortable about making ex gratia payments. I personally find that uncomfortable, which is why I went for this option. It's not about me either, or keeping control of the funds. This is a way of getting that money that otherwise is just going to be carried forward and go back to the consolidated fund into the parishes to do good works in the parishes. Admittedly, some are more material than others, but I leave it for members to decide. It's really up for their consciences on where they stand with ex gratia payments. So I maintain my amendment.
The appel, please, sir.
The appeal is called for. Members return to their seats. The vote is on the amendment brought by the Minister for Infrastructure onto P81, and I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members had the opportunity of voting. I ask the greffier to close the voting, and I can announce that the amendment has been defeated. 30 votes in favour, 13 votes in favour of the amendment, 30 votes against.
Those members voting for, Senators Rutier, Gorst, Balash and Green. The Constable of St Clement, St Saviour, Grouville, St John. Yeah.
For the amendment.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, the deputies of Trinity, Deputy Knoll, the Deputy of St Martin, the Deputy of St Peter and Deputy MacDonald all voted for.
Probably 12.5 to 29.5. Very well, we return to the main proposition, which is now open for the debate. Does anyone wish to speak?
Yes, sir.
Senator
I just simply wanted to ask the Constable of St Helier when he sums up, sir, to or any other constable actually who might want to comment. It was a Constable of St Brelard that said he wouldn't treat this as a rates payment. But I'm sure that some parishioners might want to retain some of that money to actually reduce the rate in their parish. And I just wondered if that had been considered and whether the constable would like to comment on that.
Constable St Brelard.
I said it with the amendments, sir, and I am going to support this this proposition, but I'm going to support it with the caveat that, as I've just said, I am not going to accept this money as a rates income because the states have rejected that. We have got to get to a point where we know the consequences of accepting that rates money. It's clear within the budget debate last year that it said, actually said it needed to provide a mechanism for the revaluation of rateable values needed to be approved. Now, if that's what we're going to do, then I need to know what that's going to mean and what impact that's going to have on parishes. clearly, if we're looking to revalue, we're revaluing for a reason, and it's going to be to get the money back that we're going to accept in regards to rate payments. Now, from a St Brellard's point of view, we're receiving £41,897. Under a revaluation, I don't know what extra St Brellard's are going to have to pay in regards to states' rates, in regards to recouping that money, because clearly the Treasury Department's got to balance those books. Now, when I know what that is, then I'll support it. I am for the states paying rates, but I want to know what the whole package is before we get round to that. I will treat this, I've been contacted by parishioners and my own procurers to say, why aren't you accepting this money? Well, if it's purely a no strings attached payment, then I am going to accept, that's the reason I'm supporting this. But this is not the states paying rates. That's another debate, that's for another day. That's when I've got in front of me all the detail that wasn't there in the budget debate last year. There is no such thing as a free lunch, and I'm wary about this in some ways being treated as a free lunch, because again, we haven't got all the information I think we need to inform us on what that rates and what that revaluation is going to look like. Any revaluation or mechanism to revalue is going to have an awful consequence, I think, on our rates officers in regards to how we're going to develop that and how that's going to be brought forward. Like I say, I'm going to support the Constable St Helier on this, but I'm supporting him on with the caveat that when we get to a parish assembly, I won't be treating it as rates money. I'll be treating it as an ex gratia payment, which is exactly what he's got in his proposition. So that I'm clear. I want to be totally clear to my parishioners about where I stand on this. And I think, as far as I'm concerned, I think I can't be any clearer. This is not me accepting this is rates money. This is me accepting this, or the parish accepting this as an ex gratia payment.
Councillor St John.
Thank you, sir. I didn't speak on the amendment because really, as far as the parish of St John's is concerned, I, as constable, either sit down with the minister to discuss how the money should be spent, or the minister sits down with me as constable to decide how the money is spent. And so this money will be used towards some of the schemes to provide safety within the parish. However, I do take very great exception to a comment made earlier by Senator Ossoff that St Helier is hardly done by over rates, and the states don't pay rates. I feel it my duty to remind this assembly that some years ago, welfare was centralised, and the parishioners of St John's had a 75% increase. That's 75% increase in their rates overnight, so that St Helier could reduce their rates. And that should be very clearly noted. I don't want to go into too much detail, but small parishes do have significant costs when it comes to maintaining the parish church and to maintaining certain wonderful historical buildings. And this is an enormous burden. If I was to carry out full repairs on St John's Church, as was recommended in one report, and I'd say in one report, because I have another report giving a slightly different result, I would be spending 2.5 years of rates. That's 2.5 years of all the parish rates on upgrading the church. Whereas St Helier spent £2 million, I believe, on upgrading their church, which was a small percentage of 1 year's rates. So just remember, we all have our swings, we all have our roundabouts. But today, we're not discussing the principle of paying rates, we're discussing the principle of an ex gratia payment. This, sir, was budgeted for, it was voted on, and I think therefore the payment should be made, and I look forward to sitting down with the Minister to discuss how this can be best used for the parish of St John's.
Senator Ritchie.
Thank you, sir. In the opening speech, the Connétable of St Helier mentioned that he was hoping that some of this money would be going towards a scheme in Havre de Pas. I would just like him to confirm that that will be the case, and perhaps like to learn a bit more about whether other schemes and improvements are likely to come forward and to be funded from this money in the parish of St Helier.
Senator Joseph.
Thank you, sir. So, if I may just respond to the remarks of the Constable of St Brelade, firstly, and perhaps give him some emolument to assuage some of his concern that he has. The issue is that there's a timing difference between the fact that the States has agreed the MTFP allocation for the rates to have been paid, and the lack of delivery of the legislation in order to correct it. So it's perfectly correct, but there's a further timing difference as well. The timing difference is the money for the States to pay it was not effectively legislated for by way of amendment to the law for the difficulties that we just had. So he can treat it as an ex gratia payment, doesn't have to treat it at rates, but it's going to be income, which under my understanding of parish law arrangements is he has to go to the parish assembly to get approval to spend it. So it's like other income. So that should deal with that. Now the thing about the other side of the transaction is that there was always this problem that, of course, as the Constable of St Clement has said in other debates, there's no free lunch, or somebody said that. So there was a problem, an outstanding problem, of how was the £1 million or so that was going to be required for the States to pay rates, and where was it going to be found? And the idea was that it was going to be found by a future revaluation of commercial properties, of which the majority of the commercial properties are in St Helier, and the majority of which are offices. And because of an absence of a revaluation, because they've been stuck at 2002 levels, and office rents have gone up broadly in line with inflation, other retail premises such as hotels have gone down, there has been the unfortunate unintended consequence of simplifying the way that rates are levied to make it easier for the assessment committees. There has been an economic unfairness, which means that there are winners and losers, and the losers are, in proportion, the retailers and hospitality people, and the winners have been the office owners. Jersey has incredibly low commercial rates in comparison to virtually all other jurisdictions. I know the United Kingdom is not a jurisdiction that one likes to compare with, but if we were effectively levying a commercial rate which was equivalent in the United Kingdom, then the parishes would be getting 80% of rent roll on commercial rates. In Jersey, it is between 2 and 4%, depending on what the actual real value of the property is now, and it's come out of proportion. I know the problem of revaluation is causing parishes concern. I understand that, but there's also a need to understand the economic unfairness of fixing something forever in time when markets adjust. And retail is in difficulty. We're just about to have a debate on retail taxes, and effectively this might be some emolument in order to reduce, on balance, effectively redistribute the commercial rates income and add some to pay for, if the States was to agree to pay for this States paying rate. So the States are going to be funding this from effectively its resources, so taxpayers are going to fund this for the first year. That's what this debate is about, and we're having this because we've agreed to do it. It's being funded by taxpayers without a corresponding income line from effectively commercial rates, which would largely come from offices. But that's a debate for the budget, sir, and hopefully we're going to be able to sort this out. And hopefully there's going to be a way of dealing with the understandable concerns of the parish assessment committees that don't want to have to go through a revaluation, and particularly those parishes that have got not much in comparison with St Helier and St Saviour commercial rates, where the unfairness is clearly there. And it is very, very clearly there from the work that I've been doing recently. So that's the difference. And I hope that that would assuage members' concerns and assuage the Constable of St Brelard's concern. All the effect, ultimately, subject to the state's approval, is going to be that effectively an uplift, and my calculations are about 23 pence per square foot officers in town are going to pay more to pay for the state paying rates. 23p, which will mean that because of the enormous amount of quarters that exist for that, and by the way, that doesn't mean to say, before the Constable of St Clement's gets too excited, that they're rich with the right to levy rates. Some of it, of course, goes to the island-wide rate that paid for the unfair welfare burden, so it actually doesn't go to the parishes. A lot of it goes to the states in order for the island-wide rate to be paid because of the unfair welfare burden, which was an outrage and an unfairness. And I hope the Constable of St Clement's, who's put his light on, is not going to stand up and say that another former son of a Constable of St Saviour who was treated unfairly doesn't know what he's talking about in relation to race. I hope that that's not going to be the situation, because we both share a common history of both our fathers being constables of St Saviour. And I know he will say that fairness is important because he did so in welfare. And I hope he's not going to start saying that there is an unfairness or an overly fair arrangement for St Saviour, the fine
Can we come back to the point, please?
Exactly, yeah. But I'm just basically putting my oar in first, because I know he's going to come back in. Because there is a division in the constables, sir, and it's not a fair one. And I think we need to be fair to St Saviour, to first of all St Helier, St Saviour and St Brelard's in that order, and the others. I know it doesn't matter hugely to them, but it matters to those three parishes. And if they want to do a revaluation, they should be allowed to do it.
Any other member wish to speak? Constable Clement.
Sir, I won't speak immediately about Senator Ozoff's obviously lack of knowledge about the rate system, but we can come to that a little bit later. And if I offended him or anybody else by suggesting that St Helier was the richest, not a rich, the richest parish of the 12, then you've only got to look at our balance sheets and income and expenditure accounts to see the accuracy of that remark. But sir, I do have a difficulty in accepting a gift which is not rates, as my colleague Councillor St Ballard has said. It's not rates at all. It is a gift which we have not asked for, and in reality we don't need. I'll tell you why we don't need it, Senator. Because the budget for this year for our parishes was set in July or August. The rates bills went, and that was the amount fixed for the amount we're going to spend, the total amount we're going to spend in this 12 months to the end of April. The bills have gone out, the bills have mostly been paid, so the reality is, unless we have something that we didn't budget for, then we don't actually need the money. Now, this is extra, unexpected windfall. That's all it is. And in the proposition, there is no restriction whatsoever on how that money should be spent. It could be put to overspends if we've spent more money than we expected to or planned to on anything that we can think of. It can be a special project which the parishioners will decide upon, or it could go, if the parishioners so decide, to reduce the rate next year, which might be a bit of a folly because the rates will only go up the following year. So whether the states pay rates or not, because the same money will be collected on the budget, not on. In fact, we don't decide what we're going to spend the rates money on. We decide what we're going to spend, and then decide how much the rate is going to be, which I think is a much more sensible way of budgeting and planning. So one or two members spoke about the burden on St Helier of these states properties. Now, other parishes have, and that burden can be resolved quite easily, because other parishes have commercial properties in them, and some parishes don't even collect the waste, for example, from commercial properties. Other parishes charge commercial properties in addition to the rates for collecting their refuse. That is a matter for each parish to decide what it's going to spend and how it is going to spend it and who it's going to spend that money on. There's no restriction on whether, if St Helier and the states decided that it's unfair, the states could offer to pay for their refuse collection and any other services they use. That would be a perfectly legitimate thing to do and something that happens in other parishes now. Now, Senator Rosev goes on at length. Oh God, do I want those clocks in here quickly? But it talks about the revaluation. The revaluation, as if this is some miracle is going to happen and everything's going to be fair and equitable. Absolute nonsense. Because any revaluation, which is going to take years to happen because every single property have to be revalued, will raise not one extra penny in rates. Because the island-wide rate is fixed by law. Okay, the states could change that, so they want to increase it, but I think that wouldn't be very popular. And the parish assembly fixes the amount required by the parishes and therefore the parish rate. All the revaluation will do is redistribute who pays what. No extra money is going to be raised, but some people will pay less, some people may pay more. So some people will be very happy, other people will be very unhappy. There's a judgment to be made there, but it really is not going to affect the finances of the parish or the states one iota. It's going to cost because there'll be a major work to be done to do this so-called revaluation, which no one knows how to do it, even at the Treasury at this moment in time. So I really don't know which way to vote. It's nice to get the money, but a gift horse in the mouth, I don't know. I'll decide in a minute.
Any other members to speak? Deputy Martin?
Yes, just briefly, sir. And it's good to follow the constable of the parish I live in, and I'm sure as one of his parishioners that he may have set the rate, but there are things that he can do with this money. And it's a shame to hear that he says that when the re-evaluation, which will not be easy, there'll be winners and losers, but it's going to be the right winners and losers. As Deputy Senator Rosev said, you've got shops paying too much, that are losing customer, not getting too much in, and others who are in finance, great big offices, and not, it's exactly the same. So I just sort of rise to speak to address something that the Commentator of St Martin said earlier about, well, whose money is this and where does it come from and why do we shouldn't be spending it? Well, the money's been raised, the money is there, and I can think of so many projects in, I'm a deputy for St Helier, I live in St Clement, and I was a deputy, a resident of St Saviour. There are always things you can do for your community. And it won't be I understand what the Constable of St Clement is saying, but I have, believe it or not, I do have a lot of respect for every constable. Not one of them will spend this money silly. They have to send it, sir, to a parish assembly, and then there can be amendments from the floor, or there will be other propositions put. And he knows, every constable knows, they are not pet projects. These are projects that people want in their parishes that get put off each year because a lot of people, and sensibly, don't want the rate to go up. So I think it is a windfall. I think it was voted. I said earlier, sir, that the rates never got paid because the law was defective when it came. So we are where we are. But I really don't think that anybody should turn this money down. And in the scheme of things, St Helier looks like it gets a lot of money, but it has 33% of the population. Divide that out evenly. I mean, it might be the richest, sir, and I could go on. I'll leave it up to the constable I work for to sum up. But I think that this is time to divide this out, to put this to bed, and the constables, now the amendment failed, will have full control with the parish assemblies how they spend this money in their parishes, which is all part of the island. All the parishes added together makes the whole of Jersey, and it will make it better. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Andrew Lewis.
Sir, anybody listening to this debate from the outside today would think Groundhog Day or are we in a different parallel universe? I'm just I'm getting confused myself, and I think the Councillor St Clement's confused himself earlier today as well, or just now. I would recommend to him, please don't kick a gift horse in the mouth. This is a sensible way of resolving a problem that we've created ourselves to a certain extent by not foreseeing a problem that the DFI Minister has seen, but even he hasn't accepted, by the sounds of things, that the reason why we are where we are is because of a quirk in the process. That's all it is. The issue of not wishing to make ex gratia payments is not a great thing to do as an accountant. I would fully understand why the Minister would say that. But he also knows why we are where we are. And this is a creative solution to resolve it. So I would thoroughly recommend to all members that they simply go for this. It solves the technical problem. We have another day to debate the bigger issue, which is the continuance of that payment. But I do hope that the acceptance that we had in this Assembly not that long ago, that parishes should, or the state should pay rates, is a given. So we are discussing a technicality. And I would hope today we can resolve it, because otherwise people looking into this chamber from the outside today would think, well, I don't know quite what they think, but I don't think they think we were thinking particularly rationally. The rational solution is the one the Constable has brought to us today. We should go for it. We should get on with this and stop discussing this. This is everybody's town, not just the town for St Helier residents. It is everybody's town. It is our capital of our island. Therefore, we should be proud of it, and we are. It has to be paid for. The debate about the cost of how that's run is for another day. But there is an acceptance amongst the public, I believe, that there is a cost to running a small town that doesn't have the opportunity to create economies of scale like other towns around the UK. We can't share things with another town down the road. Senator Oza's suggestion that in the UK commercial rates were considerably higher is true, but they pay for policing, education, numerous other things. That's not to say that I don't believe commercial rates are still lower than they could be, because there's lots of things that we could do. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have financial constraint as well. And I'm also slightly confused with the Constable St Clement, or he seemed confused, about the issue of whether the parish should decide how this money is spent or not. One moment he was saying they should, the next moment he was saying that they shouldn't, and it should be apothecated, and I was a bit confused there. So I hope we can stop all the confusion today, put a message out to the public that we've made a decision, we're sticking to it, we've got a plan, we're not keeping constantly changing our minds on this issue, the decision is made, the way around, the work around is an ex gratia payment. It's a sensible approach to resolving a spiny problem that's been around for a long time. And get on with it, vote for it today, resolve the problem, and get on with the business of running our parishes, and not least running our capital of Jersey, which needs this to happen. We've got to stop debating it and get on with it, and then in the future make sure that this type of problem of having to resolve a technical financial problem doesn't occur again, and we think ahead so we don't have the problem we've got today. So I would urge members, please vote for this. Let's get on with it and resolve the problem today. Thank you.
Well, we're past 5:30. Can I just test the mood of the Assembly? Do members wish to continue this evening on this particular proposition? Right, good. Well, I hope that might act as an inhibitor as well, because we've had quite a full debate. Constable St Saviour.
Yes, sir, and I'm going to add to the confusion. Sorry about this, but I am the oldest member of the House. I pressed that I was in favour of the proposition, and I am definitely not after this very heated debate that I gave. I do apologise, just pressed the wrong button, but we are all confused, but I'm not confused. I do want this money for my parish. I will be staying with the Constable of St Helier, who has tried most of his life, I would think, to get this through. And we are going, and I am going to stay with him, and so is St Saviour's. And I do apologise for having a senior moment and pushing the wrong button.
It's happened before. Does any other member wish to speak? Then, if not, I will ask the Constable of St Helier to sum up.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to resist making a remark about pushing buttons. I do share the Constable of St Brolad's wariness about seeing this as a long-term decision about the states paying rates. I've got enough scars to know that this is not a decision about the states paying rates. This is about a decision about the states paying rates in 2017, in this year. It is rates money, as far as I'm concerned, and I believe it's up to the ratepayers to decide what to do with it. Senator Farnham began the resumption of the debate by asking whether it could be used to reduce the rates, and I'm sure, as a later speaker said, the parish assembly, if the constable decides to call one, could decide to hold the money over to reduce the rates in the following year. So it is, in fact, a small step. I urged the Chief Minister to take a big step when we were debating the amendment, but actually I do see this as a small step. The big step will come at the end of next month when we have the budget debate, and hopefully we will put the matter to bed for good. That irritating fly appeared again, the fly that Senator Ozef reminded me I'd coined that phrase in 2005 about a former constable of St John. I think he was a deputy of St John, became the constable. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to engage now with the constable of St John to try and explain the principle of the states paying rates. We've heard the example of the town church before. I just would like to correct him. We didn't pay that £2 million in a year. It was spread over several years. And incidentally, St Helier doesn't receive anything from the states for the fact that we have our annual service there. Perhaps we should be levying a bill. The Constable of St John is still smarting over the equalisation of welfare, which I think is a pity, because the unfair burden of welfare, which was not just St Helier, it was St Clement, St Saviour, the urban parishes suffered because of the island's policies in concentrating development in the urban areas. Of course, the welfare burden fell unfairly on the urban parishes. And wasn't it a good thing that St John parishioners now take an equal share of that burden with everyone else across the island? Senator Routier asked whether the parish assembly of St Helier could vote the money for a Havre de Pas scheme. Of course they could. It's entirely up to ratepayers. The Havre de Pas improvement group is certainly the most active residents group that I'm aware of in the parish, and I'm sure they will be turning up mob-handed to make sure that some of this money goes to their corner of the parish. Senator Ozef gave us another good speech. He started off by offering the Constable of St Brelade an emolument. I think he meant emollient. But that's just to help up Hansard later on. But the senator has always had a good grasp of the subject, and I do look forward to the amendments that he's promised to find a way of finding a sustainable solution to the states paying rates so that we don't have to do this every year, or in this year's case, I think 3 times. We don't want to have these debates. I don't want to have these debates, and I hope that the budget debate, which is coming up at the end of November, will provide a solution, and we can actually move on to other things. The Constable of St Clement, it wasn't so much a red herring as an old chestnut. This idea that if we don't charge the states for services, that would be a solution, wouldn't it? Well, of course, it wouldn't be, because rates, as he should know, are a form of local taxation based on the attributes of property. They're basically like council taxes in the UK. And if we allowed the states off the hook, every other ratepayer could come to us and say, well, Constable, I don't want you to collect my bins. I'm not paying my rates anymore. So it isn't just about services. It's a form of local taxation from which the states have been exempt for far too long. And hopefully, as I say, at the end of next month, we will sort it out well and truly. I thank other members who've supported the proposition, and I maintain the proposition and ask for the appel.
The appel is called for. The vote is on the proposition of Conotable St Helier for the allocation of the payment of rates and funds for payment of rates on states' properties. I ask members to return to their seats and ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have the opportunity of voting. I ask the greffier to close the voting and can announce the proposition has been adopted. 38 votes in favour, 4 votes against.
We have the 4.
Those members voting Conch, the Constable of St Martin, the Constable of Grooveville, the Deputy of Grooveville and the Deputy of Trinity.
Propose the adjournment, sir.
Adjournment's proposed. The states now stand adjourned. Oh, no, they don't. No, they don't. Before we adjourn, can I just announce that the Privileges and Procedures Committee have lodged the Conitub Amendment Number 2, Jersey Law P110. States now stand adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow morning.